Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on Twitter at MMALOTN. This week we're going over UFC Vegas 18, headlined by Alexander Volkov and Alistair Overeem, a very pivotal heavyweight matchup as we got number 5 against number 6, or I believe it's number 6 now against number 7, but very, very intriguing fight. Both guys coming off of solid victories, and a win here could definitely put them in line for a title shot or at least a number 1 contender fight. Very excited for this card. You know, I mean, we had a weekend off. The UFC just gives us 3 fights in 1 week for their debut in 2021, and then decides to take a weekend off. But now we got 8 straight weekends of events, so we don't have much time to rest and kick back and do just whatever. You know, I mean, we do have a solid amount of fights to look forward to, and this is a solid card in terms of a fight night. Overall, we have solid fights all around. Barn burners for sure. We got a couple, bangers, and I can't wait to get into that for you guys. But first and foremost, let's get into the last event that we had, which was UFC 257. We end up in the green, which is great because we were pretty much in the red the last 2 events before that. So it's good to end in the green. However, still down about minus 13 units in terms of 2021 over those 3 events. But I'm very happy with my performance in terms of the last event and being confident in a play that not a lot of people were really seeing me or seeing it from my perspective. So let's start off with that one. My dog of the night play, I had 1 unit on Marina Rodriguez at plus 282. That was a solid amount of value. I thought if anything, this fight should have been a 55-45 or a 60-40 split. However, we get a ton of value on Rodriguez there. And I'm like, just give me 1 minute of this fight on the feet with Rodriguez, throwing out some combinations, and we'll see how Hibas reacts, especially against a fighter that actually knows how to throw and how to strike and is as mean of a striker as Marina Rodriguez is. And we saw that. The first round went as most people expected it to, but this fight always starts on the feet. And that's where the advantage for Rodriguez was. And she landed some bombs on Mrs. Hibas there, and that cashes for us. Not only does that cash for us, so we hit plus 2.82 units on Rodriguez straight. Then we also took a 0.25 unit shot on her to win via KO at plus 1350. That hits for plus 3.37 units. Absolute amazing fight. And that was a great turnaround considering how the first little bit of the card went for us. So I was very happy to hit that. Let's go on to another dog of the night play. I had 1.5 units on Antonio Carlos Jr. at plus 107. That crashes. Tavares does a much better job of keeping this fight on the feet than I expected him to, and absolutely lights up ACJ. And I believe he wins that fight via decision. The fights were a while ago now. I don't know why that I can't remember them to the best of my ability, but good win for Brad Tavares there. Also another, we don't have any more dog of the night plays. My lock of the night play, I only put 3.5 units on this. So as you guys know, my lock of the night plays normally go 3.5 units, 4 units, 4.5 units, or 5 units, depending on my level of confidence in them. This was on the lighter side, one, because my confidence was a little bit shot. I'll be completely honest, to lose the last 2 lock of the night plays was very, very rough. So I had to be a little bit more cautious here. And we got probably the least predictable outcome here, which was Marcin Prachnio to win this fight via decision. I don't think a lot of people expected that to happen. I thought if anybody was going to win, it was going to be via knockouts. But we see this fight dragged all 15 minutes, and we see Prachnio get his hand raised. So I know that busted a lot of parlays for people for one. The fight doesn't go to decision. I think a lot of people were on that. The under 1.5, and not to mention the Khalil Roundtree at minus 320. I thought that was an absurd line, which is why I wouldn't have played him there. But I thought that the spot was the under 2.5, however, or under 1.5, and that still misses. Even the under 2.5 misses. So that was minus 3.5 units there. And then we'll go with the next one. I had 2 units on Mahmoud Muradov at minus 144. Honestly, Muradov and the under 1.5 in the Khalil fight were my top 2 picks for lock of the night plays, which is why I put 2 units on Muradov. I was trying to figure out which side I should go there, and unfortunately I picked the wrong side. Luckily, I still bet Muradov, cashed that for plus 1.39 units. Very happy to hit that. Solid performance on his end, and a solid finish at the end there as well too. I know a lot of people were on the decision prop there for Muradov. Luckily, Muradov goes out there and gets the finish and secures that win for us. And then lastly, I had Daniel Hooker, 1.25 units at minus 125. That crashes. Michael Chandler goes out there, knocks him out. Beautiful performance from Michael Chandler. Don't have much to say about Hooker in that spot. So at the end of the day, it was Marina Rodriguez that saves us. Plus 1.33 units to end the night, 14% ROI. But again, I dug myself in a bit of a hole those last two events before 257. So I'm hoping to continue to get back to the playing field and a level head here with this next event that we got at UFC Vegas 18. Got a couple plays already posted. They will be free to the public on Friday, the day before the fights. So if you guys want to wait, you guys can catch them then. Otherwise, if you want to hop on those plays earlier, they're already on the Patreon. $5 a month. Link is in the description below. Early access to the breakdowns, plus a ton of other perks. I'm not going to rattle them off. But yeah, all the information's in the description below. Make sure you guys check that out. Another thing I wanted to plug. I have an affiliate program with Coolbet, which is a great bookie up here based out of Toronto, which is where I'm from. So I want to give them a little bit of shine, give them a little bit of a rub. And they probably don't even need it because they've won a bunch of awards in terms of being one of the best sports products out there. Their app is amazing. Their web browser is amazing. Their mobile browser is amazing. They give solid props. You're allowed to parlay props as well, too. Not something that a lot of bookies allow you to do. But yeah, they have a great program and great betting odds as well too. That's where I was able to get Rodriguez at plus 282, whereas at most places when I bet her, she was roughly around plus 250. So they have great odds, solid selection of sports. They have so many cool things. You can see what other people are betting on. So if you just want some degenerate action, you can copy other tickets and just put your own money on it. So there's cool things like that. There's a leaderboard as well too. Very, very intuitive and sleek format that they have, and outlay that they have on their website. So definitely worth checking out. So if you're interested in Coolbet, I have the link in the description below, but the bonus code is MMALOTN2. If you guys put that in, it's the number 2, MMALOTN2. You guys get a $200, they'll match your deposit up to $200, 100%. And I believe there's a 6 times rollover. So outside of that, a great deal, solid affiliation program with them. I already got them a bunch of guys right off the bat, but they gave me an even better deal now, considering how successful this affiliate program has been. So make sure you guys go to coolbet.com. It's in the description below. I'll also have the countries that you're allowed to sign up for this website at in the description below. And again, after you sign up, make sure you guys use the promo code or bonus code MMALOTN2. They'll match your deposit 100% all the way up to $200. What a deal, right? All right, let's get this boat moving along. I've already plugged the Patreon, plugged the Coolbet. Nothing else to do other than to get to the actual breakdowns itself. So I'm very much looking forward to this. 8 straight weekends. We got cards right up the wazoo. Hopefully we can start off the stretch on a nice win here. So yeah, let's get into the breakdowns. Osbourne versus Dennis Bondar. We got minus 170 on the UFC newcomer Bondar and plus 150 on Osbourne. Let's start off with Ode, who's coming into his sophomore stint in the UFC, or not sophomore fight in the UFC, I should say. He did lose to Brian Kelleher in his UFC debut way back at UFC 246, which was the same night Conor McGregor defeated Donald Cowboy Cerrone. So that was January of 2020. So we're talking over a year layoff for Osbourne. Before that, he did not secure his contract in the UFC by beating Armando Villarreal via armbar on the Contender Series in July of 2019. It took him just about 6 months to get his first fight booked in the UFC, and then he goes on and loses to Brian Kelleher. The guy looks interesting. Like, he has a great frame for the division. I think he is obviously a 135, he's 5'7" with a 72-inch reach, but he's just so long and lanky, and he can definitely get his limbs up there for some of these jiu-jitsu submissions or anything that he wants to throw up off of his back. So that makes him very interesting to begin with. He throws with a little bit of heat. It seems like he's pretty easy to take down, which I think is going to be the big thing here with Dennis Bondar, who's shown great takedowns, great wrestling, solid jiu-jitsu, and solid scramble ability as well, which I believe is going to be huge for him here, as I do think we'll see Ode a little bit offensive off of his back, which may make things a little bit harder for Bondar to get settled and really get his game going, or even pull off a submission of his own. But Ode could definitely make things very, very interesting. Now, my qualm here with Ode Osbourne is we've only seen him go to a decision one time, or sorry, twice. He won one, and then he won one via split, and then he lost one as well by unanimous. But his last, what is that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fights have all ended in the first round. And then we know what to really make of these guys, coming into the UFC with all first round finishes, or, only fights that go into the first round, because if fights get extended, we don't know what the cardio looks like. You know what I mean? That's the big part, first and foremost. That's the one thing I really like to look at when I'm looking at some of these newer fighters coming into the UFC is, what does the cardio look like? You know what I mean? If they're pushed to get extended to like the second and third rounds, are they just going to fold over and just get submitted or TKO'd? That could absolutely be a possibility, right? But this Bondar guy looks pretty good. I'm very impressed with what I've been seeing over his last couple fights. 2 fights ago, he's fighting in probably the worst setting you could have an MMA fight. Like no cage, no ring, nothing, just open mat, and it didn't even look like the biggest either. Like the guys are like rolling for heel hooks and just rolling out of the off the mat. It was crazy. Like if you're in any situation where you're in a leg lock, just keep rolling. Once you get off onto the mat, off the mat, like they're not going to set you right back up in that position. So luckily for him, he goes out there, still gets a submission victory, and he's on a bit of a roll as well too. Like he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 straight wins, all via finish. Most of them coming in the first round as well too. We've seen him in the third round. Seems like his cardio holds up a little bit, and his wrestling is the main thing here. I think that Ode will have a lot of issues in terms of dealing with that, but I think he could potentially pull something off of his back. I'm not willing to risk the money here on Ode and think that he'll actually finish it, but it's definitely a possibility. And you want to be careful with these UFC newcomers. Again, you can almost say that they're both newcomers here. I mean, Ode only spent 2.5 minutes in the cage against Kelleher, and we saw him, give up a takedown and then eventually give up that guillotine choke. In terms of training, we got Ode Osbourne coming out of Pura Vida, I think it's called. Pura Vida, which is actually in Milwaukee, so it's not Rufus Sport. It's actually the gym that Zach Otto trains out of. So that like Milwaukee's pretty much split into those 2 camps. Most fighters tend to go over to Rufus Sport. We've seen Ode Osbourne have a couple training sessions at Rufus Sport, but most often than not, we see him training with Pura Vida. Solid training camp. You got a couple guys that have made it to the UFC, that have made the walk before, that have been successful to a certain extent. But I still think that Bondar's wrestling is going to be a little bit too much here. I think he'll be able to accrue the top position. The longer this fight goes, I feel like I got to lean more so on the Bondar side. And again, that's just off of the fact that we haven't seen Osbourne as of late extended in those second and third rounds. But I'm going to assume that he probably doesn't have the tank to go for that. And again, just being continuously taken down and controlled from on top, I think is just a bad look for him. So I like Bondar here. He could possibly pull off the submission as well too. I'll go with second round submission for Bondar. But I'm very intrigued to see how this guy pans out in the UFC, because he definitely looks like a bit of a monster and a bit of a beast. So I'm interested to see how far he can truly take it. But I'll go with Dennis Bondar to win this fight via second round submission. Youssef Zalal versus Seung Choi. We got minus 255 on Youssef Zalal, who's stepping in on short notice against Seung Choi, who's plus 195. The line did open around minus 200 for Zalal, and we've seen the steady money come in on Zalal to make him an even wider favorite here. So the last time we saw last time we saw Youssef Zalal was against Ilya Topuria, and everybody knows Topuria's name at this point in time. A young, hot prospect coming into the game, and came in as a slight underdog against Youssef, but actually first initially came in as a pretty hefty underdog, and then all the love and money came in on Topuria, pushing him to pretty much an even. I think a plus 110 was like the best line that you could get at him once the fight started. But we saw Topuria, great first test in the UFC, great to really showcase that this guy is a top level guy, has a ton of potential, going out there and outgrinding Zalal. And we're talking about a Zalal that's like very well trained, and I believe he's coming out of Colorado on Team Elevation, but he also has a ton of experience too. Like last year alone, he made his UFC debut against Austin Lingo at UFC 258, and then goes out there and puts together, 4 fights in 2020. and going 3-1, obviously the one loss to Ilia Topuria. He still goes out there, beats Jordan Griffin, and then beats Peter Barrett as well too. And he was scheduled to fight Seung Choi that night. Instead, he gets Ilia Topuria and picks up his first loss in the UFC. Great stand-up fighter, moves well, throws a lot of spinning shit, very unorthodox with his approach, but it can also go out there and outgrind guys too, exactly what he did against Austin Lingo, where he was just able to take him down time and time again, show some solid work from on top, and also pull off a couple of submission attempts as well too. He's very active, solid cardio as well too, and I think that's where the edge is going to be here against Seung Choi, who seems to deteriorate the longer the fight goes. Choi, on the other hand, the guy's had a very tough run in the UFC. He's 1-2. His one win coming against Suman Mokhtarian. If you guys remember the Mokhtarian brothers, I think his other brother's name was Ashkan Mokhtarian. I might be getting that wrong, but both brothers, absolutely horrible fighters. I just don't think they deserve to be in the UFC. So at least Choi was able to get a bit of a layup in that fight against Sumani. He goes out there and absolutely just outworks him over 15 minutes. Kind of surprised that we didn't see Choi get him out of there, but we saw what Choi looks like when he's at his best. His Muay Thai is on point. His clinch game is on point. He's able to use his knees, elbows, and kicks to the best of his abilities, and he's able to outstrike these guys. When your UFC debuts against a guy like Movsar Evloev, things are pretty tough. So he got outgrinded in that fight. Then he goes in against Gavin Tucker, who was on a mission. He lost for Gavin Tucker. He was coming off that loss to Rick Glenn, where he just got absolutely beat down, and he came back with a huge fire. In this fight against Seung Choi and just went off on him, eventually finishing that fight in the third round. Now, this is still a tough fight for Seung Choi, which is why he's such a hefty underdog here again. I think Youssef Zalal definitely can put the work on him, put the pace, put the pressure on him, make him move. And I think that Zalal is definitely a solid spot here. I want to give Choi the benefit of the doubt, but it's very tough. Like, the fight against Anglin was probably an easier fight for him, and he was the favorite going into that fight too. But now here he is as a plus 200 underdog. Youssef Zalal, again, we saw him really break down and we saw a lot of pain from him after he lost to Ilia Topuria because he was on such a great run. And then he loses to Topuria. So I think we're going to see him come back with a huge fire under his belly as well too. And this is a great matchup for him against Choi. I can even see Zalal going out there and kind of just grinding this fight out like he did against Austin Lingo. You know what I mean? We know that the Muay Thai champion in Seung Choi is definitely the best when he's able to fight at range and fight in these clinch positions as well too, get his knees going. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Zalal kind of snatch up one of those legs, one of those knees, and take this fight to the ground. So I'm expecting a full MMA display here from Youssef Zalal. I'm expecting him to come through as a minus 255 favorite, and I think he's a solid parlay piece. I think he's a great fighter. Seung Choi has just had the worst luck of the draw in terms of the types of matchups that he's being put up against. Now, if he's actually deserving of being in the UFC, he should be able to steal at least a round here from Youssef Zalal. But it's a tough ask. Zalal is very well trained, a solid fighter, great talent, was just outmatched stylistically in his last fight against Ilia Topuria. But here, I think this is a great fight for him to get right back on track. So I'm going with Youssef Zalal. I think he wins this fight via decision. But again, very unfortunate for Choi for taking this fight. He just wants to fight. You know what I mean? It's unfortunate. And the last time we saw him was December of 2019. So we're talking about over 13, 14 months since we've last seen him compete. So he has to take this fight. You know what I mean? So once again, I got Youssef Zalal to win this fight via decision, just having, grinding him out, taking him down, doing some good work from on top, but just being the more active fighter. So once again, Youssef Zalal to win this fight via decision. Molly McCann versus Lara Procopio. We got minus 160 on, I'm making sure that's actually the right number. Yeah, minus 160 on Molly McCann and plus 140 on Lara Procopio. Let's start off with Molly McCann, who's coming off a unfortunate loss to Taila Santos last time around in a fight where she came in as a minus 140, minus 150 favorite. And a lot of people were on that Molly McCann train thinking, okay, she went out there and wrestle fucked Diana Belbita. She should be able to do the same thing to Taila Santos, who in her previous fight kind of got grapple fucked as well by Mara Romero Barella. But you gotta extrapolate a little bit. You can't just look strictly at the last fight. And if you extrapolate for Taila Santos, especially her fight in the Contender Series, she looked absolutely amazing. Just on point every single aspect of MMA. Her striking looked great, her wrestling, her grappling, everything looked great. And it truly seemed in her UFC debut against Mara Romero Barella that it was just more so the jitters, or she just really wasn't feeling it that night, because that was just not a good that was not a good statement of who she actually is as a fighter. And we truly saw that come to fruition in her fight against Molly McCann. Now, Molly had a lot of issues trying to get Santos down, and she really couldn't get her striking game going either, which was a real bummer for her, considering that her background does come from the boxing world. She landed a couple good shots on Tyler Santos, but nothing incredible that really blew your hair back or anything like that. And then Santos was able to, get the better of the striking exchanges, push her up against the cage, get her to the ground, and control her on the ground as well too. I believe she accumulated close to 6 or 7 minutes of control time on Molly McCann there. Again, like I said in the fight before with Diana Belbita, it's not going so well for her in those first 3 minutes, where Belbita coming in as like a plus 350, plus 400 underdog, she goes in there and she kind of lights up Molly McCann in those first couple minutes. And then Molly decides, you know what, let me wrestle. And then she goes out there and she wrestles. I think she lands, I want to confirm this number, but I think she landed over 5 takedowns in that fight against Belbita. She landed 5 takedowns. She even got a 10-7 in that round too, due to a point taken away from Belbita, but it was a lot of one-way traffic in that second round. And then obviously she completes the third round by winning a decision there. But I don't know what people were thinking they were getting with Molly McCann going into that Tyler Santos fight. Like, they just see a grappling display on one fight, and then Santos struggling the fight before that. But again, extrapolate it a little bit. Let's go back and let's see what they actually look like. Maybe not in their UFC debuts or anything like that. So Molly McCann, I'll give this to her. Solid hands, solid striking. She does a good job of closing the distance to kind of land her bombs. But she doesn't have crazy striking to the point where you're like, okay, this is a Tyler Santos situation, or this is a Marina Rodriguez situation with Amanda Hebos. Like, she doesn't have that good of striking. Even Karol Rosa. Like, I would take Karol Rosa in a fight against Molly McCann any day. And the reason I bring up Karol Rosa is that's the only fight that we've seen Lara Procopio have in the UFC. She goes out there and lands, I believe it was 170 strikes. Let me get that number right So Karol Rosa runs 171 strikes on Lara Procopio, and then Procopio in return lands 165 strikes of her own. And we're talking about Procopio, who's a jiu-jitsu player. She's a black belt. She trains with Novo Uniao and Andre Pederneiras and those guys. And, she trains with Ketlin Vieira, another high-level 135er. But her game is jiu-jitsu. So if you go back and watch her fights on the regional scenes, you see her going for the takedown almost immediately, whether it's a body lock takedown, a trip up against the cage. She gets the opponents to the ground, and then she goes to work with the jiu-jitsu and pulls off a submission every now and then, has some ground and pound finishes. I'm very bummed that I wasn't able to find her last 2 fights before the UFC, because she won both of those fights via decision, and I'm kind of assuming that her jiu-jitsu had a lot to do with it. Now, she just wasn't able to close the distance properly against Karol Rosa, where she went 0-5 on takedown attempts. But, a lot of that was kind of desperation takedowns. And I don't think we'll really see true desperation takedowns here from her against Molly McCann, who could almost easily be bullied up against the cage. And at that point, I think that's where we'll see Procopio land some of her body lock takedowns or her trip takedowns, some takedowns that we've seen Molly McCann give up in the past. And just going through her IG as well with Procopio, you see her really working on her strength and conditioning. She knows she needs to get a little bit stronger, especially going up against some of these women. She's 5'4", with a 67-inch reach. For Molly McCann, we're getting 5'4" with a 62-inch reach. So slightly bigger frame on Procopio here. But again, it's for her to be successful in this fight. I truly believe she needs to get this fight to the ground. I think Molly McCann could land some good shots on the feet. And again, Procopio kind of holding her own against Karol Rosa. Obviously outstruck, like damage-wise, it was obviously Karol Rosa's game. But to still go out there and land as many strikes as she did, it was very, very impressive in my end. And not to mention, look at Karol Rosa's face in that fight. Like, she took some damage. It's not like they were pitter-patter 165 strikes that were landing on Rosa. some of them did have a little bit of pop on them too, and she definitely busted up the nose of Rosa in that fight. So I don't think it's going to be a complete wipeout for Molly McCann on the feet, but I think Procopio will be able to kind of hold her own enough to eventually drag this fight to the ground and then really get her jiu-jitsu game going, which is where I think she's very live to even pull off a submission victory here. We saw Gillian Robertson pull off a submission on Molly McCann in her UFC debut, and you could probably chalk it up to a little bit of butterflies. It's in your hometown, Liverpool. You know what I mean? Like, it might have caught up to her. So I'll give McCann a little bit of a pass there. But when you're talking about a black belt in jiu-jitsu here, who most of her wins earlier in her career came via submission, I could definitely see her pull off a submission here against Molly McCann as well too. So I'm going to be leaning with the grappler here. And I do get shades of like poor man's Amanda Hebus and poor man's Marina Rodriguez, in the sense that Molly McCann is a striker. And Procopio is obviously the grappler here, but I don't think that we'll see a Marina Rodriguez type starching from Molly McCann here. More so I'll see, them play on the feet a little bit. And then when Procopio, once she can really push this fight up against the cage and start to drag it to the floor and start to use her top position. So at plus 140, it's not a bad spot for Procopio, who I think will have, the more dominant grappling and be able to get this fight to the ground more often than not. We obviously know takedowns usually score a lot more than what you'll see on the feet. And even if Molly McCann wants to take this fight to the ground, I think that would be a mistake on her end, trying to have to deal with the black belt in jiu-jitsu from Procopio, because she is quite active from her guard, which is very, very impressive. Something that I usually like to see from black belts. It's great to have a black belt, but if you're not offensive with it and trying to make your opponent uncomfortable and try to nullify the strikes that are coming from on top, then I don't really rate you. But Procopio, you see it. When she's on her back, she's working for arm bars. She's working for reversals. She's definitely on it more often than not. So I like what I see from Procopio, and I'm not sure why I had this negative perception of what I was thinking Procopio was coming into this fight. Again, she got starched by Karol Rosa. Not starched, but unanimously outstruck over 50 minutes against Karol Rosa. But again, Rosa is a legitimate striker. Procopio does her best work in the grappling. She wasn't able to get it there, but I do think she'll be able to get it there against Molly McCann. So in a fight that I see closer to 50-50 and possibly even giving Procopio an edge in terms of possibly being a favorite here, I think we're getting some solid line value at plus 140 on Procopio, and people are getting hip to it. We got plus 165, I believe, was the open on Procopio, down to plus 140. I think that we'll see this line start to tighten up the closer that the fight gets. So I'll probably have to toss a little bit of a bet here on Procopio. Again, it's a little bit of the Molly McCann fade, but also when you take the styles and the history into consideration, you got to see that Molly McCann, 33% takedown defense. She's gotten taken down 8 out of 12 attempts against her, and Procopio is definitely going to be searching for that. And people might want to discredit Procopio a little bit just because of the desperation takedowns they saw later in the fight against Karol Rosa, but that's not how she gets her takedowns. That's her after 13 minutes of getting beat up in the face. You know what I mean? She's not going to get to that point. I think she'll be more successful with the takedowns earlier in the fight against Molly McCann. Again, push her up against the cage. The types of takedowns that Procopio uses to get fights to the ground are takedowns that I've seen other fighters use against Molly McCann and be very successful with it. So, I like Procopio here. I think she's live for a submission too. So just to be ballsy here, I'll go out there and say she wins via first or second round submission. She's really going to put that black belt to use, and I really think it will make her live to get a submission victory here. So once again, I'll go with Lara Procopio to win this fight via second round submission. Karol Rosa versus Joselyne Edwards. We got minus 170 on Karol Rosa, and Joselyne Edwards is coming in at plus 150, who just made her debut at the beginning of January, the first ever event back in 2021 for the UFC. She makes her UFC debut on short notice there, and she once again comes in here, steps in on short notice to fight Karol Rosa, who originally was supposed to fight Nico Montano. So let's get into this fight. And I'm very much excited for this fight. Let's start off with Joselyne Edwards, first and foremost, who's, again, making her sophomore run into the UFC. Came off a very successful debut against Wu Yanan last time around, where she outstruck her close to 40 strikes. I do want to get the actual the exact numbers. Yeah, we had 88 to 58, and then we had one takedown from Wu Yunan there, one sub attempt from Joselyne Edwards as well. If you guys remember that first round, she throws up that very close armbar, gets close to it a couple times. Unfortunately, Wu Yunan gets out of it both times. But what do we see from her? And it's exactly what I was expecting. After running the tape on her from a regional scene. We saw, solid Muay Thai, good striking, good knees, good aggression, solid groundwork as well, too. When she was on her back, she did a good job in terms of reversing takedown attempts from Wu Yunan, or even just reversing her on the ground and then throwing up a couple submission attempts as well, too. So I was very impressed with Edwards, just as I said I was when I was breaking down that fight against Wu Yunan. I thought she had a ton of potential. I still think she does. She's still young in age. She was born in 95. So she's 25 currently. Karol Rosa on the other end is 26. She just turned 26 in December. So relatively same age here. In terms of experience, we're talking about Karol Rosa, who's 13-3, and we got Joselyne Edwards, that's 10-2. So pretty close there in terms of the amount of experience. Training partners, the advantage definitely has to go to Karol Rosa here, who pretty much trains regularly side by side with Jessica Andrade. So that's a solid training partner to have there. Joselyne Edwards, on the other hand, still just training in the middle of nowhere, not really getting in good with training partners. So that's a little bit of a concern. So the difference with Edwards against Wu Yunan and Edwards against Karol Rosa here is, I think that Rosa is a little bit more of a refined striker than what she was going up against with Wu Yunan. I like what we're seeing from Rosa in terms of combinations, solid leg kicks, a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, good fight IQ in terms of when to take the fight to the ground or clinch up when necessary. And I think that might be a little bit of the kryptonite here to Joselyne Edwards. Now, I don't want to see Karol Rosa go out there and take down Edwards, as Edwards, again, like I said, very active off of her back, and she could possibly be live for a submission there. Even though Karol Rosa coming into this fight is a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. But on the feet, I'm interested because I thought in the Wu Yunan fight we would get damage versus volume, but the person who is bringing the damage also brought the volume as well too. She goes out there, I believe she throws 206 strikes, lands 86 of them or 88 of them. Again, completely outstriking the person that was supposed to be bringing the volume and the output. Now here with Karol Rosa, we're talking about somebody who attempted over 300 strikes in her first fight against Lara Procopio. I do want to pull that up in terms of the actual numbers. So she landed 171. She threw 351. In her next fight against Vanessa Melo, she landed 120 and threw 228. Mixed in 2 takedowns there as well too, for a total of close to 6 minutes of control time. So I think Karol Rosa might be the better overall fighter here, and she has a lot to offer on the feet. I got to give the speed advantage, though, to Joselyne Edwards. I think she throws with a little bit more pep in her step. She throws a little bit more heat and throws a little bit more speed, too. But Karol Rosa just brings back such a very educated lead hand. That's one thing that I found very impressive with her in terms of from her jab to her lead hook. She shows it all. She shows a great versatility with her striking game. So I'm very impressed with what I'm seeing from Karol Rosa. I wish this fight was lined a little bit closer, though, because I do lean the Karol Rosa side, as I do think she has a more complete game, throws in combinations, and I think she could kind of stunt the forward movement of Joselyne Edwards, by just sticking those combinations out there and remaining active. Joselyne Edwards could obviously have her moments as well too, mixing in her complete Muay Thai game. But with that said, we do see solid Muay Thai from Karol Rosa as well, who in clinches finds those vital knees and those perfectly timed knees to really initiate damage on her opponent. So this is a close fight, closer than the line suggests. But with that said, I'm not the highest on taking Edwards in this spot at plus 150. I do think she still has some solid potential. I think she could definitely make a little bit of noise in the top 15 in this division. However, I just need to see a little bit more from her against more, recognized opponents or more legitimate opponents. And I think Karol Rosa herself, who is a prospect, I think that's a good test for both women here to see where they're at and who really is more ready to crack into that top 15 and that top 10. I also do believe that Joselyne Edwards, mainly somebody that, again, is only second fight in the UFC, is a 135-pounder. It seems like Rosa is going to have a little bit of a size advantage when I'm talking about actual mass. So we got 5'8", 70-inch reach for Joselyne Edwards, whereas Karol Rosa, we got 5'5", 67.5-inch reach. But in terms of like strength, it looks like Rosa will definitely have the advantage there. She seems like she would be able to bully Joselyne Edwards a little bit more. A little bit torn on this fight, but I am going to side with the Karol Rosa side, as I do believe that she has a better overall game. Again, I love her combinations. I love her tenacity in terms of sticking with the combinations and moving forward. Her durability looks great too, but then again, she's not really fighting the hardest punchers in Vanessa McCann and Lara Procopio in her last two fights. But I'm still interested to see how her career totally shapes out. Edwards, the last time we really saw her have issues was against Sarah Alpar, who was a very grapple-dominant opponent who just kept pushing Edwards up against the cage, taking her down, not really doing too much damage, and allowing Edwards to get back to the feet. So I don't expect to see that type of approach here from Karol Rosa. I'm expecting both of these women to throw down. I'm not going to entirely say that the damage is strictly going to come from the Edwards side, because I do think Rosa has some pop on her shots. She throws great combinations, and she really snaps the head back of her opponents whenever she's landing these big shots. So, Edwards does seem to be a hittable opponent. She might be able to use that reach advantage to her advantage a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be huge here. So, again, I'll go with Karol Rosa. I think she lands more shots here. She looks busier. Maybe sprinkles in a takedown or two, showing off that fight IQ of hers. And again, solid training camp coming. I'm trying to remember the exact team's name. PRVT. Perenne Valetudo. Where Jessica Andrade trains as well too. So I'll go with Karol Rosa here. I think she wins by decision, combinations, takedowns, and just an overall game. And I think that Edwards might be a little bit too green to be facing an opponent, who has this type of experience and seen the types of fights that Rosa has seen at this point in time. But again, I'm not going to completely write off Edwards here. I think she has a solid chance to really fill out to be a solid prospect. But this is a very tough test, especially on short notice too. You're taking this on short notice. You're fighting a better version of Wu Yanan. And again, I think the combinations and fight IQ of Karol Rosa will definitely pay off here. So once again, I'll go with Karol Rosa to win this fight via decision. Martin Day versus Timur Valiev, and we got no betting line on this yet. This fight was put together pretty last minute over the last couple days. However, this is Sunday, me recording this, and we still don't have a betting line. I want to get my podcast out on Monday, so I just got to do the breakdown. I'm fully expecting Timur Valiev to be around a plus or minus 350 to minus 400 favorite here. And at that line, I don't think that he's going to be bettable. So let's talk about their skill sets to begin with. We got Timur Valiev, who's coming off a very close victory over Trevin Jones. Unfortunately, it gets snatched from him by Mr. Chris Taioni, who does not stop the fight against Trevin Jones. And then Trevin eventually in the second round goes out there and lands a beautiful counter hook, which eventually puts Timur Valiev on his butt, follows up with some ground and pound, and gets to finish that way. I'm a little bit skeptical about that whole situation. First of all, I'm okay with the fight not being stopped when Valiev had Trevin Jones hurt. Like, Trevin was still on his feet, doing his best to cover up as best as possible. He was eating a lot of shots, but he was still moving. He was still trying to get his wits about him. And you could clearly see the power bar on Timur Valiev slowly depleting, or I should say his stamina bar totally depleting there, as he was just throwing everything he could into those shots to try and take Trevin Jones out of there. Jones, pulls through, makes it to the next round, and then just lands a beautiful counter of his own and follows up with some ground and pound. And I have a little bit of an issue with that stoppage as well too, as I feel as though you could see that Valiev was trying to get back to his feet. He was in a prime position to get a takedown of his own if that fight had continued. However, Mr. Chris Taioni is just like, you know what, it's all right. Both these guys have taken enough damage. Let me just stop this fight here. So big win for Trevin Jones as a hefty underdog there. I actually want to get the actual number of what he closed at as, because that was insane. I believe Valiev was like a minus 800 favorite going into that fight, because Trevin Jones took that on super short notice. So the actual number was minus 640 for Timur Valiev and plus 470 or plus 450 for Trevin Jones. So I still think Valiev has a lot to offer here. He's 16-2. It was his only second loss here. His only other loss was to Chris Gutierrez, who I believe it was a split decision loss. He got the immediate rematch and gets the victory in the second fight. So, has an argument to be undefeated at this point in time. I still think he has a lot to give. Very crafty with his kicks, is a heavy kicker for sure. Likes to throw spinning stuff. Is more along the Magomed Sharapov side of things in terms of talking about Russians than he is on the Khabib side. He does have solid wrestling. He can take guys down and accrue some solid top pressure there too. But he does a lot of his damage from his hands and from his kicks. And that's why I think he'll have the advantage here against Martin Day, who Martin Day himself, a solid boxer and a solid striker himself. However, he really, really leaves himself open to be countered. And he doesn't really have the greatest pop on his shots either, which is why guys are okay to just bite down on their mouthpiece, throw caution to the wind themselves, and more often than not, they'll land on Martin Day themselves. So, Martin Day obviously coming off of, I believe, 3 straight finishes right now. He lost a split decision to Ping Wian Liu. I'm always going to butcher that guy's name. Gets knocked out by Davy Grant in round 3 back at UFC 251. And then most recently gets guillotine choked by Anderson Dos Santos in November. So he's taking this fight on relatively short notice. But I want to talk about that Dos Santos fight first and foremost. We saw the first couple, like maybe minute and a half, 2 minutes play out where Martin Day was doing some good work on the feet. And then you just saw this flick, like this switch just completely happen on Anderson Dos Santos, where he's just like, screw it. I've tasted what this guy can throw at me. I'm just going to stand there and just try to throw bombs. And that's what he did. And he landed a couple big ones on Martin Day, eventually getting this fight to the ground, doing some good work from on top. Martin Day eventually gets the butterfly guard and pushes Dos Santos off of him, but just makes an absolutely horrible mistake. Terrible fight IQ there in terms of following the get up with a takedown of his own, and not just a takedown, a huge takedown where he leaves his neck exposed, and Anderson Dos Santos, being the black belt that he is, snatches onto that neck and eventually gets the tap via guillotine choke. So I just don't know how you can be comfortable backing Martin Day no matter what odds he's at. You know what I mean? You can say what you want about Valiev possibly having an iffy chin, but I do think that Trevin Jones hits much harder than what Martin Day brings to the table when it comes to the striking realm. Technically, if this fight goes to a full 15 minutes, Martin Day could be live with his striking. But I do think at a certain point we'll see Valiev catch him, land the better shots, maybe even get some wrestling going as well too, as I do think Valiev has a solid top game. And Martin Day seems to show decent takedown defense at times. However, I think the more you lay it on him, the more successful that you'll be. So that's what I think we'll get out of Timur Valiev here. But with that said, again, we're probably getting minus 300, minus 400, maybe minus 500 on Timur Valiev here. And with that, I'm just going to stay away. I just don't think there's enough value there. You get Martin Day off of 3 straight losses. He could possibly know that this is definitely the fight that has his job on the line. I thought it was last time. Both guys, Anderson Dos Santos and Martin Day, coming into that fight 0-2 in the UFC. And surprisingly, Martin Day still gets another shot here. I think it was more so him doing a favor for the UFC and them being like, all right, we'll take it, we'll keep you around, but you got to win this one. So if he comes in there with that mentality, who knows what kind of Martin Day we're actually going to get. But based on what we've been getting from tape is, solid distance striker, good combinations, can pick his opponents apart. But I think that Timur Valiev's movement, his striking game himself, as well as that grappling advantage is going to be a little bit too much for Martin Day here. So I'll take Timur to win this fight. I think he just grinds this fight out. I think we're going to get a decision here, but my money is going nowhere near this fight, just given the circumstances surrounding it. But you're getting a pick out of me. You want to go with Timur Valiev to win this fight via decision. Mike Rodriguez versus Danilo Marques. We got minus 220 on slow Mike Rodriguez and plus 185 on the sophomore Danilo Marques. Let's start off with Danilo Marques, who is, like I said, coming into his second fight in the UFC. He comes off a successful debut against Khadis Ibragimov way back at UFC 253 in September. I believe they were the current jerk of their night, and luckily for him, he's able to go out there and beat Khadis via decision. Now, that's a fight that I took the under 2.5 in as one of my main plays, as I expected either Khadis to go out there and get him out early, or if this fight were to drag on, I thought that would see Danilo get this fight to the ground and pull off a submission over Khadis. However, neither came to fruition. Probably one of the sloppiest fights we've ever seen over there at Fight Island, and Danilo comes out with his hand raised in that fight. Now, the reason I'm so low on Danilo and why I consider him to probably be the worst fighter in the UFC, I'm sure there's a couple of guys out there that are willing to raise their hand not willing to raise their hand to take that award, but I thought Khadis was. But Hadis goes out there and proves that he was the worst fighter in the UFC, and I'm pretty sure he got cut as well. So now it's Danilo. Now with Danilo, he's going up against Mike Rodriguez, who, coming off a very unfortunate loss to Ed Herman. But getting back to Danilo and why I think he's bad. Most people know him as the jiu-jitsu coach of one Shogun Hua. He has a black belt under Damian Maia. But if you go back and run his tape on the regional scene, it's quite tough to watch. The guy's striking does not look good at all. The only props I will give him is the fact that he was able to throw a couple like lead kicks out there. Some teeps looked good, especially considering his range and how tall he is. He's 6'6", which is absolutely insane. 77.5 range reach. Very tall guy, but just does not know how to use his range or his striking good at all. More often than not, his game plan is to get the fight to the ground and try to, pull off some sort of jiu-jitsu or some submission. However, he should be able to do it against guys that on the regional scene. Like, just for example, his third last opponent, Polimeno, the guy was 0-16. I went back and checked his record again now after that fight, and that fight was July of 2017. He went on to incur 4 more losses, still has yet to gather a victory. And we saw Danilo go out there and pull off an armbar against him in the, not even sure what round that was. And then after that, he goes out there, beats a 5-4-1 guy. And then about 2.5 years later, somehow makes his UFC debut. I'm sure something had to do with Shogun Hua or his manager kind of whispering into the ears of these guys. But the guy's just not good. Like, even with his jiu-jitsu, we don't see it as high level as we would expect it to be, considering that's probably his only positive trait. But he's in here for a tough one. And even in his fight against Myron Dennis, now a lot of people look at that and be like, oh, split decision loss for Danilo. Why didn't Myron go out there and finish him if his striking it really isn't that good? But if you go back and watch that fight, it seemed like Myron was either super hesitant about the takedowns, because he was definitely not putting his full effort into those punches and those kicks. Like, it seemed like he was more so just throwing them out there to kind of keep Danilo on the outside. However, he just wasn't able to do much damage there. We saw Danilo get the fight to the ground over and over again, and there was a solid case that he probably won that fight too. But here, against slow Mike Rodriguez, he's going to be in for a world of hurt, in my opinion. That's the reason why I see the line at minus 225, which is weird actually, because the line is starting to come back down, something I thought that it wouldn't do. What do we got? So we got Mike Rodriguez open at minus 260, come down to minus 225. Usually Bet Online is the first guys to get their lines out. So let's see what they had at that. Yeah, minus 240 down to minus 210. Now, I think people are just going to go back and look at that Herman submission and be like, oh, he got tapped out by 40-year-old Ed Herman. Obviously, he's going to go out there and get tapped by this Danilo Marques guy. And in terms of Danilo, I believe he's up there in age too. Yeah, he's 35. He just turned 35 in December. But yeah, the guy, he has his work cut out for him against Mike Rodriguez. If you guys remember that Herman fight, he pretty much finished him twice there. Yet Chris Taioni was just like, nah, let's see this dead body before we stop this fight. And then luckily for Ed Herman, he was able to survive that onslaught and then pull off a more victory of his own. But very unfortunate for Mike Rodriguez. It was good to see, going back and watching Dana White talk about that fight. He said he actually ended up compensating Mike Rodriguez because he truly believed the ref fucked him over there. If you guys remember, he hit him with a couple of knees in the clinch. Ed Herman goes down. The referee thinks that it's a low blow, and Ed Herman obviously continues to play with it. And even Mike Rodriguez is like, "What are you talking about? I didn't hit him. What do you mean time?" And then luckily for Ed Herman, he was able to stick it through and pull off a late submission victory. And I think he even thinks that he got away with the murder there. So good for Ed Herman, but Mike looked great in that fight. Even before that fight, goes out there and finishes Marcin Prachnio. Beautiful elbows in the clinch. Shows that he has a lot of power, and I think that's what's going to be key here against Danilo Marques. He is also a big light heavyweight himself. He's 6'4", 82.5-inch reach. But, what I think is really going to come into play here is the southpaw versus orthodox stances that we got. So we got Danilo in the orthodox position. We got Rodriguez in the southpaw position. And one thing that I've kind of noticed from Danilo's game is, for some reason, he likes to have his hands up all the way up to his face, and I think it's more so due to maybe he was expecting like the barrage from Khadis to come nice and early. But as the fight went on, you saw a nice little pocket there under his elbow where I think that Mike Rodriguez would absolutely be able to target his body kick, something that he throws with such heat. And even in the clinch exchanges, man, his knees up the middle are just nasty. I just don't see how we see Danilo Marques stand up against this guy striking. It's going to be very tough for him to eat those shots, for him to really close that distance without eating many shots. And even getting this fight to the ground, I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult than people are expecting. Ed Herman, crazy chin, rock hard chin. So he was able to eat some of those shots. He completed 2 takedowns against Mike Rodriguez, whereas I think it's going to be a little bit harder for Danilo. Like, he's a good jiu-jitsu player or solid jiu-jitsu player, but his ability to get the fight to the ground is going to be his downfall. He's going to be able to complete it against guys like Khadis, but I think he's going to have a little bit of trouble dealing with guys like Mike. So I understand why the line is wide. I'm truly on board with Mike Rodriguez. I think his Muay Thai is going to be too much here. His elbows, his knees, his kicks up the middle. I could absolutely see this fight being finished by a body kick as well too, as I think that, like I said, that opposite stance here is really going to be key, and I think it's going to allow Marques or Rodriguez to really dig his kicks in and really get it going. Maybe start off with a couple leg kicks to really open up the inside leg kicks to really open up his kicks, and then just go to the body hard. And that's what I'm expecting here. I'd be surprised if we see Danilo actually complete a takedown and get him down and pull off a submission too, because I don't think that his submission game is really that high level. Even though he's a black belt, that doesn't always mean that he's going to go out there and get a submission victory. So I think people need to reel it back. Even though that Rodriguez lost via Kimura to Ed Herman last time around, again he beat the crap out of him before tiring out a little bit and allowing Herman to get that submission. I think if it was Danilo in that position, he might not have been able to muster up the energy to actually pull off that Kimura, which is why I'm really leaning with Mike Rodriguez here. I think that he just has Danilo pretty much beat everywhere other than having that black belt in jiu-jitsu, but I don't think it's going to be too much of a matter here. I think Rodriguez probably gets him out of there in that first or second round. It's going to be bad. It's going to be a really bad beating on the feet because Mike Rodriguez is just miles ahead of him there. Obviously looks much comfortable on the feet. Danilo just does not look that at all. So I'm going with Mike Rodriguez. I'm saying first or second round KO. I might even try to call my shot here. I think it's going to come from a body kick. Just having it as exposed as Marques does, and kind of like his length almost comes into as a flaw here because he has just so much body to work with and such a big target for Rodriguez and his kick. So once again, I'll go with Mike Rodriguez to win this fight via first round KO. Michael Johnson versus Clay Guida. We got minus 225 on Michael Johnson and plus 185 on Clay Guida. We're seeing this line slowly starting to tighten up. It was roughly around minus 245 a couple of days ago. And now the money is coming in on Clay Guida, and I completely understand that as to why that's happening. So let's go over Michael Johnson, the unfortunate 19-16 record that he has. God damn. Like I put out a tweet a couple of days ago where I'm like, if you told me coming off that Edson Barboza win for Michael Johnson that, he was 16-8 at the time, improved to 16-8 after beating Edson Barboza, that if you told me 5 or 6 years ago, or within 5 or 6 years, he'd be 19-16 and going up against Clay Guida, I'd punch you in the mouth for disrespecting a guy like Michael Johnson. You know what I mean? But here we are. He's only won 2 fights in his last, 3, 6, 8 fights. He's 2-6 in his last 8 fights. Those 2 wins coming over a split over Andre Fili, and then he obviously unanimous decisions Artem Lobov, who just doesn't know how to do anything other than strike. So Michael Johnson was absolutely going to go pick him apart there. So let's just talk about the last 3 fights where he's pretty much winning all of these fights, but then just has this slip up, has this misstep that eventually gets him to give up the fight. So the Josh Emmett fight, he was going on his way to winning a decision in that fight, and all you hear from his cornermen is stay sharp, stay disciplined, stay sharp, don't overextend. Like they're just reassuring him to be like, dude, you're almost there. We're about to cross the finish line. And then Josh Emmett uncorks a beautiful overhand, right? Puts Michael Johnson out, and he loses that fight. Then the next fight, Stevie Ray drops the first round, has a solid second round, but in that third round, he slips up. Stevie Ray gets top position and pretty much rides it out, even gets a 10-8 on one of the judges' scorecards. So he loses that fight. Next one, Thiago Moises absolutely outstrikes him in that first round. Second round, something happens, slips. Thiago Moises ends up with the ankle lock and gets a tap within 25 seconds of that round starting. Like, the guy just has these minor slip-ups, and it's just so unfortunate to see because I believe he's one of the more talented guys out there. You know, he's 34 years old. He's going to be 35 this year. I believe in June is his birthday. But you got to be very clear and cautious when you're betting Michael Johnson fights because the guy has all the skills in the world. Like, if this fight goes his way, he's going to look like a minus 600. But then he just has those momentary lapses in judgment where something slips up, something happens, and his opponent is more than able to go out there and take advantage of it. Now, you got a guy in Clay Guida who is just an engine nonstop, going forward, doesn't really mind what's coming back at him. You know, even in the Bobby Green fight, very close fight where he's able to just go out there and just continuously try to take him down, and he keeps moving forward. But Bobby Green, obviously a very good fighter, able to go out there and kind of just nullify the second and third rounds and get those gets the decision victory there. I don't feel so comfortable in Michael Johnson being able to keep the range here against Clay Guida. I feel like we will see him get the takedowns. I feel like we'll see him accrue that control time up against the cage, which is going to be very valuable, especially if this fight goes to the judges' scorecards. Now, it's obviously possible that Michael Johnson could knock out Clay Guida. He has great technique with his hands, one of the best boxers in the UFC. But again, he just has these momentary slip-ups, and I feel like when you have a guy like Clay Guida who's able to go forward all the time, grind you up against the cage. We're talking about a guy that has over, 50-something fights now. He's 35-20. He has 55 fights. He's going to have 50. This will be his 56th fight, 56th walk to the octagon. So yeah, you bet he's definitely seen somebody like Michael Johnson in the past, whereas Michael Johnson is just trying to string together a couple wins. Like, the guy just can't catch a break. If he loses here, he's probably getting his walking papers, which is absolutely crazy to think of a guy who we've had, set as high expectations as we had from Michael Johnson. If you guys remember, he was like the number one pick from the Ultimate Fighter, where it was GSP against Koscheck, and I believe he went on to lose that to Jonathan Brookins, if I'm not mistaken. I just want to go back and check that out. Yeah, he lost to Jonathan Brookins, but he beat Aaron Wilkinson, Alex Caceres, and Nam Phan on the Ultimate Fighter Season 12, and then loses a decision to Jonathan Brookins. Never really able to get his role going. He had a solid 4-fight winning streak where he beat Joe Lozon, Gleison Tebow, Melvin Gillard, and Edson Barboza. Then he loses to Beneil Dariush, loses to Nate Diaz, beats Dustin Poirier, a very high-level win there, and then from there it goes on that, 2-6 run. It's just so sad to see for a guy like Michael Johnson. So how you can be confident in laying anything better than minus 200 on Michael Johnson, or worse than minus 200 on Michael Johnson, is beyond me. I don't care if it's Clay Guida in front of you. You just can't trust this guy. I'd say he's the most untrustworthy fighter in the UFC. And if Clay Guida hits that plus 200 mark, which I think he probably will, it might even be worth a play there just for the sake of it, just off of principle. Clay Guida brings what you need in a guy that will go out there, pursue the takedowns, pursue the clinch, try to gain control time. And we know he has that gas tank as well too. In terms of getting finished for Clay Guida, which is obviously a possibility for Michael Johnson here, we've seen Guida guillotine choked by Jim Miller in a fight where he hurt Jim Miller. Jim Miller hurts him back. Clay Guida goes for a takedown, and he gets submitted. All of that happening within 58 seconds. Before that, finished by Charles Oliveira via guillotine choke. Can you really bang on him for that? The Brian Ortega fight gets knocked out in the third round. Thiago Tavares chokes him out in 39 seconds. Dennis Bermudez rear naked chokes him. So it's like, it's iffy. Michael Johnson could absolutely land a bomb on him and put him out and just pick him apart, but I'm not banking on that. I would rather go with the Clay Guida side. You won't catch me betting on Michael Johnson out here unless he's able to put together like 3 or 4 straight victories where we see him mind his P's and Q's and just keeps his distance and picks apart his opponent from the outside. That's when I'll be confident in betting Michael Johnson. But at this point in time, not me. So I'm picking Clay Guida here. I think he wins by decision. I think we just see him over and over again, just grind on Michael Johnson, push him up against the cage, get him to the ground, maybe ride some top pressure. But I just don't think we see Michael Johnson comfortable enough on the feet to really get his combinations going. But it's going to be on Clay Guida to close that distance and continuously try to take this fight to the ground. So I'm going with Clay Guida. I think he wins this fight via decision. Not my most confident pick, as I do believe skill for skill, Michael Johnson blows him out of the water, but it all comes down to the mentality, it all comes down to the fight IQ, and you got to go with the Clay Guida side here rather than Michael Johnson. So I'll go with Clay to win this fight via decision. Beneil Dariush versus Carlos Diego Ferreira. We got minus 125 on CDF, and we got plus 105 on Beneil Dariush. Now, this is a rematch from a fight they had way back in October of 2014. So we're talking about just over 6 years ago that they first initially fought. That was the third fight for Carlos Diego Ferreira, and it was his first ever career loss as well, where Beneil Dariush did a really good job of going out there and controlling this fight with takedowns, with the striking. You could definitely see that he was a little bit further ahead with his striking at that time, and he had joined King's MMA not too long before that. Whereas Carlos Diego Ferreira was still training by himself. He was his own head coach, had his own gym, and really didn't realize what it took for him to truly make it to the next level in this game. Like up until that point, he had already secured 2 victories, and he thought it was probably just going to continue to be as easy as that. Goes out there, chokes out Colton Smith in 38 seconds, and then he goes out there and finishes Ramsey Najem, a couple months after that, 2 months after that, actually, finishes him in the second round. Then he runs into Beneil Dariush roughly 2 months after that as well, too. So his first 3 fights in the UFC all came within a 4-month span. He just banged them out real quick. But then again, it makes sense if you go out there, finish a guy in 40 seconds, finish a guy in 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and then go out there and face a guy like Beneil Dariush, like I said, much further along in his career at that time, especially in the UFC. And on top of that, it's weird because he was the younger guy as well too. We have about a 5-year age difference, but obviously Beneil was fighting much better competition at that point in time. But the way Benny got the win that time was again over 8 minutes or close to 8 minutes of control time, pushing him up against the cage and really just doing him a little bit dirty. And again, in the striking exchanges, it definitely looked like Beneil was a little bit further ahead. Since that amount of time, we've seen Diego Ferreira lose to Dustin Poirier right after that. Again, you truly see the how far behind he really was in the striking game, especially going up against a much tougher test in Dustin Poirier in that fight. And then he goes out there and gets knocked out in the first round. Very, very tough test. But since then, been on an absolute tear. That was actually his first fight with Fortis MMA as well too, against Dustin Poirier. But you can't really see the progression of a fighter, right? Like their first fight in that camp. And what we have seen in that amount of time since, so it was April 2015 that we saw him get knocked out by Dustin Poirier. And now here he is, 7 months afterwards, starting a winning streak against Livio Bommercier, Jared Gordon, Kyle Nelson, Rustam Khabilov, Mirbek Taisumov, and Anthony Pettis. That's 6 straight wins that he's managed to put together in about 5 years' time, and very dominant wins as well, too. I put this out on Twitter earlier today in terms of the 3 fights that went to a decision for Carlos Diego Ferreira since his Dustin Poirier loss. He's averaged 283 strikes thrown or attempted per fight. Absolutely insane that he's putting up those types of numbers. Even in the Jared Gordon fight, which only lasted 2 seconds short of 2 minutes, he threw 60 strikes in that amount of time. Absolutely crazy, the pace and pressure and the coaching as well. We got to give a big hats off to Saif Sayoud, who's really transformed the game of Diego Ferreira from being, just this jiu-jitsu guy to, being more comfortable on the feet. Like if you go back and watch his fight with Benny and then put it up against his fight with Mirbek Taisumov, you see a complete change in terms of his demeanor when it comes to the striking game. Like he's not as stiff, he's bouncing around a little bit more, he's throwing combinations, he's moving very well, his head movement is good too, his striking defense is definitely up there. He did get rocked a little bit by Mirbek, but didn't get dropped, but definitely got rocked in that fight. But then since that moment in that fight, that was in the first round, he just changed gears and really started to put it on Mirbek and drowned him. That was kind of the fight that really put me on, like, just reminded me, okay, this is a guy that's been making changes and has made changes and came into that Mirbek Taisumov as like a plus 250 underdog, goes out there in Mirbek Taisomov's pretty much his backyard over there in Abu Dhabi and goes out there and puts it on him, absolutely smashes him from pillar to post from the beginning of the fight to the 15th minute. I've never seen Mirbek that roughed up in a fight, so it really really put me on notice with Diego Ferreira. Then in the Anthony Pettis fight, he goes in there. I think he has a pretty solid favorite, minus 235 favorite. I backed him there as my lock of the night play, and he comes through for us. Anthony Pettis really didn't have much for his pace and pressure style, and eventually found himself on his back. And Anthony Pettis, and then we saw him sink in the choke. Interesting thing about that choke as well, too, you see it on the side of the head rather than like fully on the back with the hooks in and all that. But the squeeze of Diego Ferreira is just absolutely insane. So he's able to get Anthony Pettis out there relatively well. That was about 2 minutes into that second round. Well, Beneil Dariush on the flip side, we're talking about a guy that went on to lose 3 fights since he beat Carlos Diego Ferreira. He also went to a draw with Evan Dunham. But since his last time, Alexander Hernandez, where he got starched in 42 seconds, that was in March of 2018. He comes back in November of that year and takes Thiago Moises to a decision. That's a fight where he accrued over 13 and a half minutes of control time. And I believe he played that fight as safe as possible to kind of, to avoid another knockout loss. Thiago Moises is a guy, mainly a jiu-jitsu guy, but we've seen some advancements with his hands, and he has a nasty head kick as well, which he's actually secured a couple knockout victories with. So I think that's what Beneil Dariush was trying to avoid in that fight. Drew Dober fight, it was looking interesting for Drew Dober in that first round. Beneil was the one on his back foot. Drew was the one moving forward, landing a lot of good shots, did a good job of staying out of bad positions in that first round. But unfortunately, in that second round, we saw a little bit of a poor fight IQ from Drew Dober, who got out of bad positions, but then just went back to grappling and tried taking advantage of the clinch positions. That's where we saw Beneil Dariush really flip the script, hit a switch on him, get his back eventually, and then work towards that armbar and just pulls off a beautiful armbar with 19 seconds left in that second round. Very unfortunate loss for Drew Dober, who's looking really good in that fight. Then we see him go out there against Frank Camacho, get the rear naked choke there, has an absolute war against Drakkar Klose in a fight where the majority of that first round he spent on the back of Drakkar Klose in a standing position, just wasn't able to pull off a rear naked choke. And then eventually in that second round, we see them go to war. Drakkar Klose lands a lot of bombs, and then Beneil Dariush comes back and lands his bombs and eventually knocks him out with probably one of the craziest finishes we've seen, or at least sequences that we saw in 2020. And then against Scott Holtzman, hurt Scott Holtzman early with a beautiful knee in the clinch, and then follows up with the barrage. Holtzman saves himself a little bit, but eventually falls into the brawl once again, and we see Beneil Dariush lands a beautifully placed spinning back fist. It almost looked like an elbow as well too. What I've been seeing from Benny as of late is he doesn't mind engaging in these firefights anymore. Like he believes he has the durability and the chin to do it. And what can you say? It's been a long time since we saw him knocked out against Alexander Hernandez, coming up on 3 years now. And he's more than willing to go into that and exchange with these guys. We saw him kind of attacking the grappling every now and then with some of these guys, but it seems like he's very confident in his hands, and obviously doing very good work with Kings MMA and Rafael Cordero, and it just continues to show on a fight-to-fight basis that this guy has great kicks, great punches, solid Muay Thai, great knees in the Muay Thai clinch as well, like we saw against Scott Holtzman. But I feel like the changes that we've seen from Carlos Diego Ferreira is definitely going to be the factor here. Like his pace and pressure of just always pushing these guys back I think it's going to catch up to Beneil here. Beneil, you see in these fights that are going into the second round, but it end up getting a finish, he seems to be sucking wind a little bit. Now, I'm not saying that he has a cardio issue or anything like that, but I'd be interested to see how he deals with a guy who's going to be pushing forward the entire time, pushing him up against the cage. It's a smaller cage as well, too, so less room for Beneil to really, pivot out of these bad spots. I'd be interested to see if Benny doesn't get the finish in the first round and a half, how he deals with that pressure of Carlos. Like we've seen improvements from Carlos, especially in those grappling exchanges. Like Rustam Khabilov goes out there and lands, I believe, 3 or 4 takedowns on him, but doesn't even accrue more than 1 minute of control time. Like just like a cat, Carlos Diego Ferreira is just right back on his feet. He's very aware and has a good understanding of the fact that, okay, the longer that my back is on the ground, and I'm sure he learned it from the Beneil Dariush fight, the more that he's losing this fight. And he does a good job of just never conceding position anymore. He might get taken down, but he does a good job of getting right back to his feet and working back to his feet. I feel like his jiu-jitsu on par with Beneil at this point in time, especially his MMA jiu-jitsu. That's something that we're seeing an improvement from. But again, it's definitely his hands, his forward pressure, and his willingness to be comfortable in that fight, in a fight, and just move forward and know that, okay, no matter what this guy throws at me, I can continue to walk forward through it. And then eventually his cardio, his confidence is all going to be sucked dry. And what's left is going to be me moving forward and really putting it on you. And that's what I believe Sayif Saud has truly invested in Carlos's game, which has allowed him to make as many improvements as he has. I think, at 36, he doesn't have much time to keep this ball rolling, especially with that type of game plan. So getting a big fight like this against Beneil Dariush is huge for him. If he gets victory here, that's back-to-back wins over Anthony Pettis. Say what you want about him, it's still a name to get under your belt. And then also Beneil Dariush, who's also on a solid win streak of his own now, 5 straight fights for him. So I like Diego Ferreira here. I like him roughly around that even money. We got minus 125. I think that's a solid line too. And I think this is going to be a prime example of seeing fighters who probably weren't ready for the big stage, but have made strides and improvements while they're on the big stage. And we've seen a complete change in the game of Diego Ferreira, his comfortability on the feet, his pace and pressure, like I said right off the bat. I love that. His cardio seems amazing as well too. It's always his opponents that are sucking wind by the time that third round comes. So I'm interested to see if he's able to do the same thing here to Beneil Dariush, being the guy that's just moving forward the entire time, being the bull. And again, Beneil Dariush has solid striking, so he could be a solid matador as well too. But from what I've seen with Beneil Dariush, with Diego Ferreira, is solid durability, solid chin, and he should be able to move forward and just rag on Beneil Dariush this entire time. So I'm liking Carlos. I think he wins by decision. I wouldn't be surprised to see the durability of Beneil catch up with him over these next couple fights. Like, again, he hasn't been knocked down in this stretch since his Alexander Hernandez fight, but he has definitely eaten some damage and has definitely been wobbled and stunned a couple times. I don't know if Carlos will be the one that puts him out, but I definitely think that he can give him some trouble. But I'll go with Diego Ferreira to win this fight via decision and continue this Fortis Ferreira run that he's on since his loss to Dustin Poirier way back in 2014 or 15, I believe. His loss to Beneil was in 2014. His loss to Dustin Poirier was in April of 2015. So since then, he's really turned the tide and gotten some solid victories under his belt. And I think that this will be another one that he gets to add to his mantle. So once again, I'll go with Diego Ferreira to win this fight via decision. Cody Stamann versus Andre Ewell. We got minus 300 on Cody Stamann and plus 250 on Andre Ewell. Let's start off with Andre Ewell, who's coming off a successful victory last time around over Irwin Rivera, where he was able to land over 120 strikes on Rivera there. I think he outstruck him roughly by 40 strikes, but that was pretty much the tail of that fight. He used his reach advantage to a very good manner, was able to use it very effectively, as well as his movement. Used a couple of kicks in there as well to try to keep Rivera on the outside, but for the most part was very good in terms of, in my opinion, keeping a one-dimensional Irwin Rivera on the outside. And that's where the difference is here against Cody Stamann, where Ewell will still have over a 10.5-inch reach advantage, as well as, I believe, a 4-inch height advantage too. Now, Ewell, long, scrawny-ish, and has that frame of his that he uses very effectively at 135 pounds against guys of Irwin Rivera's level. But I think he starts to struggle once he goes up there in level of competition. Now, I think the highest level of competition we've seen him face to date is, I'd say, either Nathaniel Wood or Marlon Vera. And I believe those guys are like top 15-ish, between top 15 and top 20-ish types of guys. Cody Stamann, I believe, blows all those guys out of the water in terms of just level of competition. This is easily the highest level that we've seen Andre Ewell go up against, and the highest level of wrestling as well, too. And the reason I bring up wrestling is I believe that will be a big part here in terms of Cody Stamann getting his hand raised. And we're talking about Andre Ewell, who in 6 UFC fights has given up over or close to 20 minutes of control time. And that's, again, not even against a high-level wrestler or a grappler like we've seen of Cody Stamann's level. Rivera also, again, like not very well versed in the striking realm. Like he likes to blitz forward and tries to catch his opponents that way, because more often than not he's the shorter guy. Stamen, obviously roughly around the same height, but he does a good job in terms of incorporating kicks and combinations to close that distance rather than just blitzing forward and crashing forward and hoping to land some good shots. Now, we did see Rivera successful at the end of his fight with Andre Ewell to get him down and have some control time there, but it was just not enough for him to get the decision there, as I believe he should have been able to do that more effectively throughout the fight. But again, I just don't think if he's at that level to truly get to that point. I also don't believe that Andre Ewell has a good get-up game, and that's something that they referred to, I believe, in his last fight or the fight before that, where they're like, okay, it looks like Ewell is really working on his get-up game and really, working on their takedown defense. And yeah, he shucked, I believe, 22 out of 30 takedown attempts against him, but again, he's just not fought anybody to the level of Cory Stamen and being able to cut angles when going for takedowns or chain takedowns together as well too. That's just something that Andre Ewell has not seen while being in the UFC. So I think he's really going to find himself stuck under Stamen for the majority of this fight, if that's the way that Stamen goes about it, because I believe, just like he did in that Seung Yadong fight, that Seung might have had a little bit too much firepower from on the feet, so he was successful in getting that fight to the ground over 5 times. He still came away with the majority draw there, but he showed that he can definitely go out there and take these guys down. And we're talking about Seung Yadong training at Team Alpha Male, getting his grappling reps in, so to get a guy like that down was very, very impressive for Stamen on a time and time again matter. Irwin only went 1 of 9 on takedowns because he just didn't set them up properly against Andre Ewell. He completes that last takedown with, I believe, 15 or 30 seconds left, and does a good job of holding him down for that amount of time. But again, you need more controlled time than that. Cory Stamen, on the other hand, in his last 3 fights alone, he's fought much better strikers with much heavier power and still never gave up a knockdown. You know what I mean? You're talking about Jimmy Rivera, one of the best fighters in that division, probably top 10, I'd say. Solid striking, solid foundation, solid wrestling of his own. So Stamen couldn't even go to that side, which is why Rivera was able to be so successful in that fight, landing the better shots. Brian Kelleher, we know all about his knockout power. The guy has power for days, and he fought a prototypical fighter like Cory Stamen in his fight before that against Hunter Azure. Hunter Azure not able to get him down. Did not deal with the striking as well as Cory Stamen. And one thing I do want to talk about in that Cory Stamen fight with Brian Kelleher is that there's a sequence in that second round where Brian Kelleher lands a beautiful combination, lands just to the back of the head of Cory Stamen. Doesn't rock or hurt Cory Stamen, but it looked like a good enough shot to give Brian Kelleher some confidence. And usually when strikers get confidence, they start going out there and start throwing in more combinations, thinking they have their guys on the ropes. Whereas Cory Stamen, takes that shot. Brian Kelleher throws a couple more shots, and we see perfect striking defense from Cory Stamen. And then not only that, he doesn't revert to his habit or his first martial art, which would be wrestling. He goes out there and throws strikes of his own back. Like, he goes out there, throws combinations, evades a couple shots, lands a couple shots of his own, and brings that confidence level of Brian Kelleher down to where it was before he landed that big shot, at the beginning of that sequence. So that just shows me the type of fighter that Cory Stamen is. Small things like that, where he goes out there and just stands his ground and showcases that he's just not a wrestler. He's a striker too. He has solid hands, he has solid kicks, and he has a good sense of being able to close a distance. And you just have trouble in terms of reading what's going to come next at you, whether it's a strike, whether it's a takedown, whatever it is. He does a really good job in terms of hiding his strikes like that and hiding his hand. He has a great poker face when it comes to truly coming forward and landing the offense that he needs to really get his hand raised there. He's got knocked down 0 times. He's fought however many times in the UFC, got knocked down 0 times, and fought a ton of power punches in that amount of time too. So that's a huge credit to him as well too. And then he goes out there and outstrikes Brian Kelleher 89-56. Again, prototypically a wrestler in Cory Stamen going out there and outstriking a striker by nearly 33 strikes, I want to call it. Right, that's got to be impressive. That's very, very impressive. Again, against Jimmy Rivera, completely stylistically like a different matchup. Just does not add up to be a good stylistic matchup for Cory Stamen. Andre Ewell, on the other hand, he has hand speed, solid hand speed, decent movement, decent maintenance of range against some guys, but I think he's going to have a ton of problems here dealing with a guy like Cory Stamen that can attack him from so many different levels in the MMA game. From the striking, I think the striking is not going to look as there won't be a disparity in the striking realm as much as I believe some people think. And then obviously in the grappling and the wrestling realm, we know where it's going to be. We're not going to see Andre Ewell go out there and pull off some Aljamain type of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And we've only seen Andre Ewell knock down one guy in his UFC career, and that was his first fight against Renan Barão. Since then, hasn't recorded one knockdown. So I don't see how we can mathematically put together a way that Andre Ewell wins this fight. And at minus 300, I think, at all indications, you can say that Cody Stamann wins this fight 8 out of 10 times or 9 out of 10 times. That's how my level of confidence is here with Stamann. I think he's a high-level fighter, top 15, might even crack the top 10 one day. But I think he's a solid fighter that will push away guys like Andre Ewell, who, in my opinion, just aren't in that top 15 yet. Stylistically, horrible matchup for Ewell. I think if Cody Stamann wants to go out there and attack the wrestling, he can take him down time and time again. And if he wants to go out there and kind of strike with him and show him, okay, I can make this a striking fight, I think he can remain relatively competitive in that realm too. But again, it's all to eventually set up that takedown. If Stamann goes out there and shoots 0 takedowns or lands 0 takedowns, I'd be absolutely surprised. I'd be flabbergasted if we don't see Cody Stamann succeed on a couple of takedowns here. But I do think he takes him down pretty much at will, rides out that top position, maybe gets some ground and pound going. And again, I think he has good enough top pressure and top game to hold Ewell down and stay out of any submissions that might be coming his way. So, I like Cody Stamann here. I think he can get it done via decision. Not much of a finisher. And Ewell has shown, he has been submitted by Cody Stamann, Nathaniel Wood, and there was one more, and Marlon Vera, where he went out there and just absolutely ground and pounded him. Beautiful elbows as well to finish that fight. So I don't think we'll see a finish out of Cody Stamann here, but I do think that we'll absolutely see him outclass Andre Ewell in this fight, taking him down repetitively or repeatedly, I should say, and working for that decision victory. So once again, Cody Stamann via decision. Manel Kape versus Alexandre Pantoja. We got minus 145 on Pantoja and plus 125 on the newcomer Manel Kape. Let's start off with Alexandre Pantoja first and foremost, who's coming off a loss to Askar Askarov last time around. That fight was back in July of last year, and it seems like he's taking a little bit of time off. He was scheduled to fight Manel Kape on the last card of 2020, December 19th. However, Pantoja had to withdraw, and now they're rescheduling it for this upcoming card. And it's a great fight, and it definitely tells you what the UFC thinks of Manel Kape, especially putting him up against a guy like Alexandre Pantoja, who's a top 10 flyweight at this point in time. So, speaking of the last fight that Pantoja was in against Askar Askarov, that's a fight that he had a solid first round where, we were getting a grapple heavy attack from Askarov. However, Pantoja did a good job of kind of reversing position and even had his back for a little bit and ended up winning that round on all 3 judges' scorecards. The next 2 rounds, however, was a little bit more so on the Askarov side, as it felt like Pantoja was starting to slow down a little bit, and this fight, mainly contested in the grappling realm in the second round, and then the striking realm in the third round, and Askarov was able to get the better of Pantoja in both of those rounds, getting the judges nod there. We really start to see there's always this narrative out there for Pantoja where he starts to slow down a little bit in the second and third rounds. And he did a good job of going scramble for scramble in that second round against Askarov, even getting his back at a certain point. However, in that third round, it seemed like his striking defense was very much lacking due to, possibly, a compromised gas tank, Askarov being a little bit fresher and landing the better shots, especially his jab from that southpaw position was just on point, and Pantoja just wasn't able to react quick enough to really get out of the way of those shots. Pantoja, a little bit of a one and doneer when it comes to the striking realm, especially in the second and third rounds, which is why I think he's going to have to go out there and really implement his grappling game to get the better of Manel Kape. That's where we see Kape struggle a little bit whenever he does go up against those types of guys. Pantoja is still, in my opinion, potentially top 5, top 10 flyweight, but I think he needs to really focus on what got him to the dance. In my opinion, that's really just going after his grappling, going out there and trying to submit these guys, as he is a high-level jiu-jitsu black belt. And again, he comes from a great team, in an American Top Team, that allows him to really, kind of exaggerate his technique and his skills that make him that much better. He is an Ultimate Fighter 24 alum. He lost in the semifinals. I'm trying to remember the guy's name. It was a Japanese cat. Hiromasa Ogokubo. Absolutely butchered that name, but I gave it a try. If you guys remember, that was that season of the Ultimate Fighter where they brought in all different promotional champions from all over the world, and they all competed to see who would fight Demetrius Johnson at the time, because they just could not find any more contenders for Johnson. And I believe it was Tim Elliott that ended up winning that season and going on to fight Demetrius Johnson for the title. But yeah, I still think that we do see some solid skills from Pantoja. Decent striking. Again, he knocked out Matt Schnell in their fight. They had a crazy start to the fight where they're just trading in the pocket. It seemed like Pantoja knew that Schnell's chin was slightly compromised and he could be knocked out, so he tried testing it right off the bat. They weren't able to get it going right off the bat. It was weird that I saw that Matt Schnell jumped guard for some reason, in a very questionable decision, especially after rocking Pantoja and then obviously taking into consideration Pantoja's jiu-jitsu expertise. Pantoja eventually found his way back to the feet. They started exchanging a little bit more, and we saw a beautiful counter overhand right from Pantoja after Schnell threw a nice body shot, and it absolutely landed like dead smack in the middle of Schnell's face. It forced him to kind of collapse face first onto the mat, and the referee stopped the fight after that. So I think that Pantoja, when you see him at his best, he's going out there and getting first round finishes. Matt Schnell, again, very interesting fight there again, because he did get rocked early. He didn't get dropped, but he did get rocked. Very questionable fight IQ from Edgar in terms of pulling guard rather than following up with some more shots there. Wilson Hayes finishes him in the first round. Luka Sasaki finishing him in the first round. The Brandon Moreno fight was interesting because he did a good job of kind of just implementing his game and winning that fight. But the Davison Figueiredo loss, that's just Figueiredo marching him down, landing the better shots overall, and then knocked him down once as well too, but just wasn't able to get the finish. And then Askarov goes out there and wins the second and third round. So against Beneil Cape here, who's coming in from the Risen scene, he's been on a lot of people's radars, especially after he beat originally he beat Ian McCall. It was a facial cut caused by a knee, so that was a stoppage. Then he goes out there, he loses to Kyoji Horiguchi, where he was getting pretty much all grappled in that fight. Kaya Sakura has a very close fight with him, going strike for strike. Some solid top control from Asakura in that fight too, but we did see Beneil Cape land some really good shots there as well. Nakamura, I don't really rate that guy too much. However, we do see Beneil Cape go out there and get the rear naked choke. And again, when he goes out there and fights a grappler, a heavy opponent, and a Luka Sasaki, he finds himself on the bottom and cannot really get out of those bad positions. And Luka wins that fight by decision. Next three fights, Ito, Mizugaki, and Asakura. He finishes them all by knockout, and it really shows when he's at his best what it looks like, and that's with the striking heavy approach. Now, my concern here, though, is he's a little bit low output, one and done with his combinations, not really throwing much in combinations, but he's very flashy, has a big mouth, likes to be, really flamboyant, if you want to call it that, in the cage. Likes to talk a lot. It reminds me of a little bit about Kevin Holland in terms of kind of just goading on his opponent and just really trying to get them to overextend. But his striking looks really good at times. He's very explosive and squirmish as well on the ground. So you do have to, make sure that you go position over submission with this guy, especially when you take him to the ground, as he does a good job sometimes of getting out of those positions. But the more you wear on him on the ground, the less he is likely to get out of those positions. And that's where I think that Pantoja has the advantage here. Now, can you go and really bank on Pantoja to go after the takedowns, to pursue the takedowns? I think so. Like, again, coming from a team like American Top Team, you got to believe that these guys know that, okay, Pantoja might be outstruck on the feet here, especially the longer this fight goes. So the best way to get the victory here is probably to take this to the ground and try to pull off some jiu-jitsu and pull off a choke of some sort. And I think that's the approach that we'll see from Pantoja here, and I think we'll see him be successful with it. Now, the line is, it was roughly around minus 125. Now we're getting minus 145 for Pantoja, and I'm thinking people are starting to see the flaws in Cape's game once this fight does get taken to the ground. And another interesting caveat to add to this is the first time in a while that we're going to see Cape fighting in a cage. He's been fighting over there in Risen. We know they usually fight in a ring with ropes and stuff. So I'm interested to see how he approaches this fight. Being pushed up against the cage, especially if he's on bottom, how uncomfortable that really is for a fighter. Here's to hoping that he's been training alongside a cage and really starting to get how that feels, because I truly think it's a completely different fight, especially when you're implementing the ground, the clinch positions up against the cage. It's completely different. You know what I mean? So I think Pantoja's experience here should give him the edge. Only 3 years older, but has been in the UFC for a lot longer time, has been fighting high level competition this entire time as well too. And I think he has a solid enough chin to kind of survive whatever Cape has to throw at him in the earlier parts of this round. But that's where I think it's important for Pantoja. He's going to have to get this fight to the ground, as I believe that Cape could one and done combination him for rounds 2 and 3 if it comes down to it. Almost look like a Davison Figueiredo fight possibly if this fight does get extended. So I like Pantoja early. I think we'll see him get the takedown. I think we'll see him pull off a submission too. But the longer that this fight goes, I kind of give it more so to Cape's side here. But I wouldn't be surprised if you see Pantoja get takedowns later in this fight as well. So very close fight. Probably going to stay with it, but I'll go with the UFC vet here. I think that we'll see Pantoja get the takedowns and eventually pull off a submission early in this fight. What is the submission prop too? That's actually something I want to see. I feel like if it's better than like plus 400 on Pantoja, it might be a good spot. Pantoja by sub plus 285. Yeah, getting a little greedy there, thinking that it'll be a better price. But yeah, I got Pantoja here. Close fight. Glad that we finally got Cape in the UFC. I think we'll see some fun fights with him, and he's going to be a great character as well in the UFC. But I think this is a very tough test for him for his first fight in the UFC. Again, he's fought some solid guys in Risen, Asakura, Horiguchi, and those guys. But I think that Pantoja and some of these other guys are going to be a little bit too much for him. So I'll go with Pantoja to win this fight via first round submission. Macy Chiasson versus Marion Renault. We got minus 210 on Chiasson and plus 175 on Renault. And it seems like the line is slowly moving towards Renault's side. We had minus 240 originally on Macy Chiasson, and now we're seeing a little bit of love come in on Renault. Let's start off with Chiasson. Obviously, she won the Ultimate Fighter. I believe it was season 28. It goes on to beat Patty Kianzad in the finals to notch that victory there and bring home the Ultimate Fighter title, or whatever they want to call it, award. Since then, she's gone on a 3-1 streak, losing to Lena Landsberg in there just before her last fight, where she took on Shanna Young on relatively short notice. She did replace, if I'm not mistaken, it was Nico Montano. Shanna Young comes in on super short notice. Again, she's a 125er coming up to 135, and it definitely showed in that fight against Chiasson. We saw Chiasson get close to 8.5 minutes of control time in that fight and did not let Shanna Young breathe at all. Like, she just pushed her up against the cage, she bullied her, she used her strength, her size, and that's what she does in the majority of her fights. Like, outside of the Gina Mazzani fight where she just was, bombing on her and eventually landed a beautiful shot to put her down, her Patty Kianzad fight, her Sarah Moras fight, Lena Landsberg fight, at least in that first round, and then obviously the majority of that Shanna Young fight, we see her go out there and just push her opponents up against the cage. There's instances where like her opponent will like dig an underhook, turn her, and try to get out of the way. But Macy Chiasson just drives all the way through, and it looks like sometimes she's just going to spear her opponent through the actual cage, and it's insane. It just goes to show how much power and strength and muscle that she uses in those situations. And then you see when she's not able to get her opponents out of there, especially in that fight against Lena Landsberg, that it starts to wear on her a little bit. Like, her cardio starts to catch up to her, and that's where we saw Lena really start to turn things around in that second and third round and getting control time of her own. If I'm not mistaken, we saw Lena Landsberg notch just close to 8 minutes of control time there. The majority of them, 7 minutes and 45 seconds to be exact. But the majority of it coming in the second and third rounds when, we saw Chiasson really start to slow down. Chiasson had 4.5 minutes of control time against Lena Landsberg in that first round. So it definitely wore on her. And I think her win conditions are pretty much predicated on her going out there and get the finish over her opponents. And that's where I think things get a little bit crazy. Macy Chiasson comes into the Ultimate Fighter. I think she was only 2-0 or 3-0, and then gets into the UFC with a 3-0 or 4-0 record. Very green for sure. Even on the regional scene, she went, I believe, 4-2. she still seems a little bit uncomfortable on the feet. She definitely has power in her hands, but the majority of her wins come from her just like out muscling her opponents, and she's able to get the finish sometimes. Again, Sarah Marques a little bit overextends herself at times. She did get the takedown right off the bat, but then eventually got reversed, and then we saw Chiasso really start to rain on her with her strengths in that second round to get that KO. Gina Mazzani knocks her out in about 2 minutes. Pani Kianzad close to getting submitted in that fight, just in the Sarah Marques fight. I believe it was the Marques fight where we saw right at the ending of that first round that she was in a bit of a pickle in terms of Marques having a pretty decent armbar on her. She was lucky that she had the cages there and also that the time was expiring in that first round. But I'd be interested to see how it looked if it was Marine Renault there, and two, if they were in a slightly better position. Again, we saw Pani Kianzad get in on some arm bars herself as well too, and we saw Kiason get out of there. I was very impressed with how we saw Kianzad finish Pani. She got her back, and then she traps her arm, so it allows for more opportunity for her to get around her neck, and that's exactly what she did, how she ended up getting the rear naked choke. But man, I just see some flaws in her game. Like at first I'm like, okay, she's a bright prospect. She's 29 years old. She still has time to really flesh out. She trains at Fortis MMA. You guys know I have a hard on for Fortis. But she still shows some rawness and some greenness in her game. And even though Maureen Renault is 43, approaching 44 in June, she still shows that she can still go out there and have some solid fights. Like she's on a 3-fight losing streak right now, but that third round against Yana Kunitskaya was just one-way traffic. Like she was absolutely busting her up and beating her up. And if this fight does get extended, again, we've never seen Maureen Renault finished in her, I believe it's 16 fights. She's never been finished. So her durability is definitely still there, and she's putting in the work. Like she still looks in great shape. In her last fight against Raquel Pennington, we saw Pennington put on a solid performance from pillar to post in terms of striking, mixed in with clinching. She did a good job in terms of just clinch fucking Maureen Renault. But the difference here between Pennington and Kiason is Kiason pretty much just goes out there and tries to clinch fuck the entire fight. And that's what starts to burn her muscles and starts to burn her cardio. Whereas Raquel Pennington, we saw she mixed in some solid combinations, some good striking, some good takedown attempts, and then clinching. And then she was able to kind of clinch and control that fight in that third round. I do want to try to get the numbers here from the Pennington fight. Yeah, Pennington controlled her for 5.5 minutes. And that third round, we saw her control for about 2 minutes there. So nearly half the round. But that was on the back end of her having a complete, mixed martial arts matchup. And that's where I think it gets a little bit difficult for Kiason. If she's not able to get her opponents out of there, things get very, very fishy for her. And I think in that third round, things could get fishy as well too. Out of the 9 wins that Maureen Renault has, 4 of them have come in either in the second round or the third round by finish. I think most notably, her last one was against Sarah McCann, and that was actually her last win. That was in the second round. But before that, she beats Toledo Bernardo in the third round. And then even 2 fights before that, she beats Milana Dudieva in round 3 via ground and pound too. So I think Renault's live here. And I'm super stunned to say that, especially for like a 43-year-old fighter. But Kiason still makes some mistakes in that Shanna Young fight. Like she's heavily overextending herself to try to implement her grappling game, her clinch game. Again, she's much bigger. She's fighting a woman that's technically a weight class below her. And there were instances where she's trying to get her down and just overextends. And we see Shanna Young kind of not totally capitalize, but get into positions where she could potentially take her back. And Renault, being a black belt herself too, I think she could take advantage of those positions. Now, the spot that I'm looking at is I'm hoping and waiting that we see Maureen Renault become a bigger dog. The trend right now is that the line is closing a little bit more, but I'd like to see, I think we'll also see some people going out there and betting Macy Kiason as this fight week goes on. And if we get that plus 200 on Renault, I might have to take a little bit of a shot there. And I'm talking about like a 0.5 unit stab, because I still think that Kiason is going to be the stronger one. She could have her success in the clinch, but it depends on what type of game plan she brings. Is she just going to go out there and just try to outpower Renault for 3 rounds? Because then it gets fishy in that third round. We've seen Renault come back from fights before where she's down and she comes back and has a very strong third round. The spots that I'm looking at, Renault via sub plus 625. Renault round 3, I think, is plus 1900. I think those are going to be some solid spots here, given that Kiason doesn't really show the best of her skills in that third round, especially if she's just heavy on the clinch, heavy on the out-muscling her opponents, and just grinding her opponents up against the cage. So I could definitely see Renault taking advantage of those certain situations, but it all depends on how Kyosan really approaches this fight. And I don't know about you guys, but again, Kyosan just doesn't look the most comfortable in the striking situations. Like, she throws good powers, but her shots are a little bit winging and they're a little bit wide. I think Renault could definitely take advantage of those spots too. It's just the strength, it's the youth, and that clinch situation. As Kyosan does have some very nasty knees, and she's very persistent with it too. Like, her output is solid, but again, the later fights get, the more fishy it gets. And I think that this is a spot where Renault could potentially take advantage in those later rounds. So if this fight reaches that third round, the live odds might be absolutely crazy for Renault to win it. And I wouldn't mind taking a little bit of a shot there. But if we also see Renault reach plus 200, I might have to, probably forcing my hand here. I absolutely see the finish where Kyosan just grinds on her, but I think that she just exerts too much energy in those situations. She's still young in her career, so maybe she's making some improvements and trying to round out her game. But Renault, she started in the game late too. She started when she was 33 years old. She's 43 now, so she's been around for 10 years. But out of all the competition that she's gone up against, she's never been finished, which is very impressive to me. So yeah, I can't believe I'm saying it. I like Marion Renault here, and I think she pulls off a third round submission victory. Those props are definitely something I'll be chasing this for this coming event. But I might make a small play on Renault here, depending on what the odds shake out to be as fight week goes. And I can see people just parlaying Macy Kyosan just because she's a solid favorite and seemingly on paper should go out there and beat a girl like Renault. But Renault's a dog, man. She's been in some wars. She's been in some tough fights, and it doesn't seem like Kyosan is that good of a nail, but she's a damn good hammer for sure. So if she can get Renault out of there in those first two rounds, I think she'll be okay. However, if this fight does end up going into that third round and we see, a solid amount of control time for Kyosan in those first two rounds, that third round is going to be very, very fishy. So I'll go with Renault, third round submission. Call me crazy, but I'm doing it. I think she has a solid spot. So I'll wait for that plus 200. I think we'll get it. But yeah, those props as well. Sub plus 625 and round 3 plus 1950, I think is a solid spot for Renault. So once again, I'll go Marion Renault to win this fight via third round submission. Cory Sandhagen versus Frankie Edgar. We got minus 440 on Cory Sandhagen and plus 350 on Frankie Edgar. Let's start off with Cory Sandhagen, who's coming off a very impressive performance over Marlon Moraes, where he finished him in the second round. A lot of people thought he was going to drag him into that third round and possibly finish him there, but he got it done a lot quicker and was able to really put it on Marlon Moraes, really just frustrated him and confuse him and just fluster him with the amount of attacks and feints and just a style overall. Cory Sandhagen really brings a very unorthodox style to the MMA cage and really makes it difficult for his opponents to really get a beat on what he's doing. The only person to beat him as of late was Aljamain Sterling 2 fights ago, where right out to shoot, the guy takes him down immediately and turns into the human backpack, eventually locking up a rear naked choke a minute and a half into that fight. Now, that fight was pretty much a pick'em going into it, and a lot of people didn't expect it to end that quickly. However, Aljamain Sterling found his path to victory and knew it had to be quick and precise, and that's exactly what he did. Able to get this fight down to the mat immediately, and he is a strong individual when it comes to the grappling game. So I believe Sandhagen is a purple belt, but at times it shows that he's even much, much better than that. However, Aljamain Sterling just threw all that shit out the window and was like, this is my world now, and he took full advantage of it. So solid work there from Aljamain Sterling. But he's been the only guy to really solve this Cory Sandhagen puzzle as of late, just because he goes in there and just does all this wacky shit. But a huge part of his game, in my opinion, has got to be his feints, because he really gets his opponents thinking, okay, is he going to throw it? Is he not going to throw it? What is he going to throw next? How am I supposed to close his distance when he's always, hitting me on the entry? But he does a good job of kind of pulling the punches out of his opponents and then really capitalizing after that. He's able to get away with throwing so much spinning shit and flying shit and just unorthodox stuff because his footwork is really good, and he's able to get out of the way of these big shots coming his way from his opponents. Like that John Lineker fight was an absolutely great, showcase of how effective he can be against some of these fighters that are just a little bit more slow, plodding, and might have tons of power in their hands. Then he goes on there and beats Rafael Assunção after that, and shows us that he's ready for the big stage, that he's ready for the big names and the guys that are up there in that top 3 range. I believe Assunção was number 3 at that time, or number 4 at most. He was ranked number 9. He goes out there and absolutely beats him, from minute 1 to minute 15. The only time we've ever really seen him in trouble is when grappling exchanges really get going. Rafael Assunção did have a little bit of success. I believe he even slammed him on his head at one point. But Sandhagen is just so slippery. He's able to get out of these positions, unless your name is Aljamain Sterling and you just have the death grip in your chokes and in your hooks. So, again, his last fight against Marlon Moraes goes out there and just picks him apart and gets a beautiful spinning heel kick finish or wheel kick finish in that second round. Follows up with some ground and pound and gets the W. And now here against Frankie Edgar, this was a fight that was supposed to happen in January of last year. If you guys remember, Frankie Edgar actually pulled out of that fight so that he can jump in on short notice against Korean Zombie and showed off unfortunate chin. That's exactly what was the tale of Frankie Edgar's last couple fights, up until the point he runs into Pedro Munoz and they main event that fight. That was his first fight down at 135 pounds. That happened in August, and he wins a split decision there. It seemed like right off the bat there was a huge uproar that Pedro Munoz won that fight. If you go back and watch that fight, it was a relatively close fight. And we saw, almost some classic Frankie Edgar stuff in there in terms of moving very well, landing combinations and pivoting out of the way, getting out of the way of most of these big shots coming from Pedro. And even when Pedro landed his big shots, Frankie Edgar was still doing a good job in terms of, keeping conscious. Like, he didn't go out as a lot of people expected him to go out. And I know a ton of people that were putting money on Pedro Munoz to win this fight, and not just win this fight, but win this fight inside the distance. And I'm sure they were just like, wow, how is he eating these shots? So maybe that has to do something with him coming down to 135 pounds. Again, a lot of people have been banging the drum since he was the champion at 155 pounds. They're like, quit the nonsense. Let's get you down to 135, where you truly should be, where you're actually cutting weight to make weight. And his first foray into 135 actually turned out to be pretty successful for him, especially going up against a power puncher like Pedro Munoz. Now, here's the difference, though. You got Pedro Munoz on one hand, who's a great power puncher, has some great leg kicks as well too, but not really the most mobile and agile guy out there, which makes things a lot more difficult when you're fighting a guy like Cory Sandhagen. When you go from a guy like Pedro Munoz, who's cool to just sit in the pocket and trade with you, and then you go up against a guy in Cory Sandhagen who's moving a lot more, uses his distance very well, and throws more than just some hooks. Like, he goes out there, throws leg kicks, throws body kicks, throws spinning shit, does a good job of maintaining distance, and really feints his shots as well too. Like I was saying at the top of this breakdown, that it really confuses guys. So I think this is a very intriguing matchup for both guys, because they're kind of going up against guys they've never really faced before in terms of their styles. Cory Sandhagen, the closest I can think of that replicates the Frankie Edgar style is Rafael Assunção, but again, it's still a completely different style because nobody moves the way that Frankie Edgar moves. And then for Frankie Edgar, as of late, he hasn't really fought anybody that moves the way Cory Sandhagen does. Maybe you can put Max Holloway into that a little bit, but again, Cory's a little bit more unorthodox. Yair Rodriguez, he ended up finishing him way back in 2017, but again, I'd kind of rate Cory Sandhagen a little bit higher than Yair Rodriguez at this point in time. And not to mention, Sandhagen is much better on the ground than we saw from Yair Rodriguez in that fight. This is an interesting fight. Now, minus 440, in my opinion, it's a little bit too wide for Sandhagen. I think he wins this fight, but I think that line is just a little bit too wide. I'm not going to touch it. If anything, I'd probably just throw it in a degenerate parlay all the way at the bottom of it, though, because there is a chance that Frankie could squeeze this one out, especially if he doesn't get finished. I'm not expecting Cory Sandhagen to finish him, but Frankie could absolutely make this fight close. Like, I'm intrigued to see how Cory deals with the in and out movement of Frankie Edgar, the combinations that Frankie throws as well, too. And I love the way he finishes combinations and then pivots out of the way, changes angles, and really is not there to be hit afterwards. But he has so much range to cover here. We're talking about five, I just want to get the numbers correct, 5'6", 78-inch reach for Frankie Edgar, and I feel like that's being a little bit generous. And then we got 5'11", 70-inch reach for Cory Sandhagen. So we're talking about 2-inch reach advantage, but we're also talking about a 5-inch height advantage as well too. And that's where I think that the difference becomes, and the hardships for Frankie Edgar really become, as I think we'll see some kicks out of Cory to really try to keep Frankie on the outside. But he's going to have to be very careful in terms of bringing his legs back, because I think we could see a grapple heavy type of approach here from Frankie Edgar, who should be able to kind of, get this fight to the ground. I don't think Cory Sandhagen has the greatest takedown defense. But it's a much closer fight than the odds actually suggest. And that's where my qualm is with this fight. I just don't feel comfortable going out there and laying money on Frankie Edgar. I just can't. It's tough. Like, he's turning 40 this year. That's another rule that I'm trying to make. Not bet on 40-year-olds in these lower weight classes. And then you're talking about Cory Sandhagen, who just has looked amazing as of late. Again, stylistically, very difficult matches and different matchups than they've ever faced in the past before. But I think that this is something Sandhagen would absolutely be ready for, and would be taking this challenge head on. Again, he was already training for him way back when, right? Over a year ago, that he's already been getting ready for him, or even had a game plan in mind to take him on. So I'll go with Cory. I don't know if it's going to be inside the distance. I'd probably feel safer just going with the decision prop here. But again, it's going to be much closer than the odds suggest. So proceed with caution if you're willing to parlay Sandhagen with some real money at that minus 440 line. But I wouldn't be batting an eye on anybody that's taking the dog shot here on Frankie Edgar, as I feel like he could bring a very interesting style to this that could stifle the game plan of Cory Sandhagen. However, I'm still going with Cory. I think he'll be able to kind of, feint well, land some good shots on the outside, really work the body as well to get some kicks in there, and really kind of stifle the forward movement of one Frankie Edgar. And again, we've seen Frankie really struggle with guys who have that size advantage on him, right? Again, I don't want to compare Max Holloway to Cory Sandhagen or anything here, but it's just never been notoriously a good spot for Frankie when he's trying to close the distance. And he's been fighting bigger guys his entire career. However, when you're talking about a guy as skilled as Cory Sandhagen here, I think he's in for a bit of trouble. So I'll go with Cory. I think he wins this fight, again, via decision. Just being a little bit more diverse with his strikes, landing the better shots, maybe even landing the more damaging blows as well too. We've definitely seen Frankie Edgar aesthetically show that he's been in a fight whenever he goes in there. Cory Sandhagen not so much on the other side. But yeah, I'll go with Cory to win this fight via decision. Alistair Overeem versus Alexander Volkov. And we got this heavyweight bout headlining this card, and it's a pretty pivotal one too, considering the little bit of a streak that we have for both guys. Obviously, Volkov is coming off to a loss to Curtis Blades, which he quickly followed up with the dismantling of Walt Harris way back at UFC 254. And he's looking to build upon that momentum. He's number 6. We got Alistair Overeem at number 5. In terms of odds, we got Volkov coming in as a pretty hefty favorite at minus 180, and we got the return on Overeem around plus 160. Now, let's start off with Volkov, like I was. Coming over from Bellator, he had a little bit of a stint over there in Russia too, but he came over to the UFC scene, and he dropped a couple of his first fights, and then recently, he's been exchanging wins and losses, particularly his last 4 fights. He was 11 seconds away from beating Derek Lewis back at UFC 229, gets knocked out there. Then he goes on to beat a short notice Greg Hardy. That was actually the first time he was scheduled to fight Alistair Overeem, and that was back in November of 2019, I believe it was. So he goes out there, outpoints Greg Hardy, who I believe broke his hand in that fight too. Comes back, loses to Curtis Blades, very tough stylistic matchup for him, and then he comes back and beats Walt Harris in a very impressive fashion, and I think that has a lot to do with why he's as big of a favorite as he is here against Overeem. We know his game. He's a tall dude, 6'7", 81-inch reach, uses his kicks and his length very well with his jab, with his striking. Is primarily a striking fighter. But one thing that we noticed in his last fight is he put on a little bit of weight, and a lot of people saw that as possibly a bad thing, but it worked out pretty well for him there. So he weighed in against Curtis Blades at 247. That was June of 2020. He comes back 4 months later against Walt Harris, and he weighs in at 265. So he puts on a solid 18 pounds there. Who knows if he was even more than 265, since that is the heavyweight limit. But, still an impressive performance. A lot of people thought it would slow him down. If anything, it would slow him down in a fight like this where, we're going 25 minutes. So I'm interested to see if we're actually going to see Volkov once again come in at that heavyweight limit and what he looks like on the scales and how it would transfer to him possibly surviving a full 25 minutes with Alistair Overeem. It was a body kick that eventually put Walt Harris down, and he managed to finish him just about a minute and a half into that second round. And again, he looked great, and I think a lot of people are kind of overblowing that, which is why he's a minus 180 favorite here. Let's talk about Alistair Overeem now, who's on a 2-fight winning streak. He could have been on a 5-fight winning streak as of right now. He gave up that last second knockout to Jairzinho Rozenstruik. I have a lot of thoughts about that regarding, Rozenstruik kind of just calling it himself, which kind of forced the referee to step in himself. You possibly, like we've seen instances in the past where referees and stuff have let fighters kind of try to battle back from that, but they just did not have it there. And that was rough for Overeem, as he was like 4 seconds away from pretty much locking up another victory right there. So he falls to Jairzinho Rozenstruik, goes out there and absolutely batters Walt Harris in their fight. Not before getting dropped and rocked himself too. He does show good perseverance, pushes through that, covers up long enough and then pushes away so that the referee wouldn't stop it. And then eventually we see him, take down Walt Harris and start to grind on him and really start to outwork him, eventually finishing him via second round ground and pound. And then after that, he goes out there and beats a 29-year-old Augusto Sakai. And I like to say 29-year-old because a lot of people put a lot of flack on these guys that have reached 40 years old and think they automatically lose fights once they reach 40. He turned 40, I believe, a day or two after he beat Walt Harris. And then 3 months later or 4 months later, he goes out there and just dummies Augusto Sakai. Those first 2 rounds, a little bit close. You could definitely score them from Augusto. But it seems once that third round hit, it started to go downhill for Sakai. And that's where we saw Overeem, absolutely bludgeoning him in that 4th round. Almost came close to finishing him there. And then in that 5th round, it was just... It took 25 seconds or 26 seconds for him to take him down and just absolutely dribble his head off the canvas with some beautiful elbows and get the finish there. So his cardio checks out. He can definitely go 5 rounds. He can definitely put on a pace for 5 rounds. And, that's very reassuring if you're looking to back Overeem here at plus money. Another statistic that I kind of threw out there on Twitter the other day was... in Overeem's 13 fights from when he entered the UFC against Brock Lesnar all the way up until the time he fought Francis Ngannou, which was the fight before Curtis Blades, he only landed 3 takedowns, which is crazy to me to think that now he's going out there in his next 5 fights after Curtis Blades and landing 7 takedowns. And that's just an attribution to him changing camps after that Curtis Blades loss. Ends up going to train with Curtis and picks up a thing or two over there. And we've seen him pull off some pretty nifty takedowns since joining that team. So we're seeing an evolution in Alistair Overeem's game, even in his late 30s and 40s now. So that's very reassuring for a fighter that is as skilled as Overeem is, and we've seen him kind of like come over to the US and try a couple different training camps out, but it really doesn't work out. Apparently there's a lot of like ego issues or something there, but he goes over to Colorado and he looks amazing. Apparently he's a great training partner now, especially for a guy like Curtis Blades who's on his way to the top. Another statistic that was great too, in his last 3 fights, he's accrued almost 18 minutes of control time, which is a further proof of Overeem knowing that, okay, I just can't go out there and try to knock these guys out anymore. I need to go out there, grind them out, slowly work my game, and then the finish will eventually come if that's what is open to me. Just as it was against Walt, just as it was against Augusto. And the finish didn't come against Jairzinho, even though it went a full 5 rounds, but he still showed off a good fight IQ there in terms of just controlling and nullifying the power of Jairzinho up until pretty much the last couple of seconds of that fight. Now here against Volkov, I think he's going to have success in kind of pushing Volkov up against the cage and really making it a dirty, grinding fight, making it an Alistair Overeem 3.0 type of fight where he's just clinching, working his knees as he always has throughout his career. One of the most devastating knees, in the clinch definitely comes from Alistair Overeem. And now, mixing in takedowns and having good top pressure and the way that he finished Sergey Pavlovich was very impressive as well too. Not really in the full guard, but just standing over and landing absolute bombs. And he's really starting to figure out how to get his striking going on the ground too, to really devastate these guys and really hurt them too. So his chin obviously been an issue later in his career. Gets knocked out by Jairzinho Rozenstruik, but again, not the cleanest knockout. Gets dropped for sure. But Jairzinho, I put him up there with like the Francis Ngannou's in terms of having knockout power. I think Jairzinho might have the second or third hardest punch in the UFC behind Francis Ngannou and maybe Derek Lewis as well too, who obviously holds the knockout record in the UFC for heavyweights. His other time he got finished was by Curtis Blades. That was elbows in the guard. Absolutely beautiful work from him there. And then, ground and pounded by Stipe back in 2016. So what I'm basically trying to get at as, I don't think that Overeem's chin is much of an issue nowadays compared to what it used to be like a couple years ago. Alexander Volkov, on the other hand, he's not really like a one-punch knockout kind of guy. Like even with Walt Harris, he puts him out there, puts him away with the body kick. You know what I mean? And before that, beats Fabricio Verdum pretty much from exhaustion. You know what I mean? Stefan Struve, same thing, beats him in the third round. So again, I don't really attribute Volkov as being this crazy knockout artist, which is where I don't really have much qualms in terms of Alistair Overeem's side here. Another issue that I have with Overeem, though, is his kind of defensive shell that he goes into whenever guys are kind of bombing on him. He just shells up like this, puts his back up against the cage, and then just waits for his moment to pounce. And, you know, it looks decent. Like more often than not, the shots of these fighters hit his guard and hit his elbows and his shoulders. But there's just that little hole right in the middle where, Volkov definitely has a very nice uppercut of his own, and he could definitely land one of those and possibly put Overeem out like that too. So that's a little bit of a concern there. But he does a good job in terms of right after getting out of that defensive shell of putting it back on his opponents, throwing a combination, going for a takedown, clinching up, whatever it is. He does a solid job of getting that back. So I do like Overeem here, and I think he has a solid shot of winning here. Currently around that plus 160 range. I want to see where the line goes before I jump on this spot. At plus 200, you're getting roughly a 33% implied odds on Overeem, and I think he has at least a 40 to 45% shot of winning this fight. So I'm looking to kind of like expand the value I'm getting here. I already have a couple plays, I already have a couple bets in play for this card. So I do want to see, where this Overeem line goes before I get a little bit too greedy and overzealous and trying to trace more dog money. So, I like Overeem here. I think he could kind of just slow this fight down. I like the improvements that we've been seeing from him since he changed camps and going over there to work with Team Elevation and Curtis Blades and those guys. And we're seeing it on a fight-to-fight basis. Like the guy goes out there, shows off his takedowns, shows off his ground and pound, shows off his ability to control these guys. And that's very huge for him. And I think Volkov is another guy that he could do that too. Volkov, sketchy takedown defense. I think UFC Stats has him listed at 66% takedown defense. But, he stuffed, I believe it was 11 takedowns of Curtis Blades, but Blades still went out there and ended up landing 14 of them. I like Overeem here. I think we'll see a decision victory from him here. Continuously taking down Volkov. Maybe not to a Curtis Blades level. Obviously, that's a little bit of a stretch given the background that Curtis Blades has in wrestling. But controlled time up against the cage, controlled time on the ground, landing some good shots, maybe some kicks here and there. Given that Volkov's leg stance is always there to kind of be hit, and then again solid work in the clinch as well too, where I think we'll see Overeem land some good knees up the middle and to the body. So I feel like there's just an exaggeration on Volkov right now due to how impressive he looked against Walt Harris. But Walt Harris, again, let's be honest, realistically is not a top 10, top 15 heavyweight. So you can't really make the comparisons in terms of how that performance will translate here against Overeem, who's a much better fighter, way more experienced, has seen guys like Volkov in the past too. You're talking about Overeem, who has, 50-something fights now? Let me do the quick math. He's 47 wins, 18 losses. So we're talking about 65 fights. It's going to be a 66th pro MMA fight, not to mention all the countless kickboxing and Muay Thai fights that he's had as well, too. So I like Overeem. I'm going to take him to win by decision. Another veteran Overeem performance, taking Volkov down when he can, getting some good minutes up against the cage, and then after that maybe pulling away a little bit later in this fight, especially given the physique that Volkov might be coming into this fight with. So I got Overeem to win this fight via decision. And those are the breakdowns. I hope you guys enjoyed them. Feels nice to be back in this chair. Feels nice to get these breakdowns out again. And again, we got 8 straight weekends of fights. So your boy's going to be hitting you with breakdowns pretty much every single day. Again, I drop early breakdowns on the Patreon. So if you guys want access to those, I should already have a couple up for the next event. But I'll be banging them out throughout the week. That's UFC 258, which is the next one, headlined by Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns. Great card. Can't wait to get into that one for you guys as well. But yeah, make sure you guys check out Coolbet. Link in the description below, as well as the bonus code MMALOTN2. And then the Patreon, link in the description below as well too. Yeah, that's about it. Good luck on your bets this week, and hopefully your boy can continue the momentum from that last card and get myself out of this hole once again. But yeah, heading into UFC 258, we hope to be up a little bit. You know what I mean? So yeah, good luck on your bets this weekend. I'll see you guys throughout the week. I got a ton of spots that I'm doing, not to mention the Thursday propping you up show that I do with Cory Saftik at 8 p.m. Eastern, the Friday final weigh-in show that I do with the Odds Crew at 9 p.m. Eastern, my fight day show that I do at 1 p.m. Eastern, and then I got stuff on Tuesday and Wednesday as well too, and not to mention the DFS show that I'm doing for my guy Sal Vetri on his channel. That should be coming out at Thursday afternoon at the latest. But yeah, your boy's busy. Let's get this money. Good luck on your bets this weekend, and I'll see you guys throughout the week.